Good morning. I call this hearing to order. A quorum is present. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. The committee procedures for remote hearings remain the same. If you are experiencing connectivity issues, please make sure you or your staff contact our designated technical support so those issues can be resolved immediately. If you wish to have a document inserted into the record, please ask for unanimous consent and have your staff email the document to veteransaffairs.hearings@mail.house.gov. Without objection, members will be recognized in order of seniority for questioning witnesses today. And this will make it easier for me to ensure all members participating have an opportunity to be recognized. Does any member have a question about the procedures for this hearing? Hearing none, we will proceed. I will now recognize myself for an opening statement. Today, we welcome Secretary McDonough and Veterans Service Organization representatives of the independent budget to discuss the Department of Veterans Affairs budget request for fiscal year 2023. Ultimately, budgets are about values, and I'm pleased to see that this year's budget request showcases a firm commitment to our nation's veterans by the Biden-Harris administration and VA leadership. During his State of the Union speech, President Biden brought veterans to the forefront of his unity agenda with substantial investments in VA healthcare, benefits delivery, education, employment training, addressing homelessness, and much more. This budget request puts much-needed funding behind these priorities. By the numbers, this year's request provides for $301.4 billion in funding for the Department of Veterans Affairs, an 11.3% increase over fiscal year 2022. I'm personally encouraged by this robust request, but now is the time to think about the future of VA and specifically the future of this budget request and the future this budget request will create. Our veteran population is rapidly changing, and as a result, VA must meet the unique needs of various cohorts, including women, LGBTQ+, minority, homeless, and deported veterans. So we must ask, does this budget serve every veteran everywhere? Does this budget reflect where we are now after 2 years of a global pandemic? Is this the budget that represents VA's changing future, or is it simply the status quo? And I look forward to hearing Secretary McDonough's thoughts on those questions. VA has certainly weathered some storms over the past 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, and I'm deeply grateful to all of the VA employees who stepped up to serve our nation. VA's healthcare workers cared for more than 620,000 veterans diagnosed with COVID-19, administered vaccines to more than 4.5 million individuals, and even supported pandemic response for civilians. VA's benefits workforce was suddenly placed in a remote posture, yet staff worked diligently to chip away at a vast claims processing backlog. VA employees proved that this work could be done efficiently online. In fact, they processed more than 760,000 cases since October 1st, the largest workload accomplished in VA history for this point in the fiscal year. Now, these are significant accomplishments, and I again want to thank our VA employees for such great service and sacrifice during trying times. As this nation starts to grapple with preparing for the next public health emergency, I know there are many lessons from this current pandemic, and I hope VA and our entire federal government can learn from them. For example, given the impact COVID-19 has had on long-term care facilities nationwide, serious reevaluations of this industry are required. To date, there have been no widespread outbreaks of COVID-19 in any of VA's 134 community living centers, largely because of VA's extensive expertise in geriatrics, infection control, and emergency response. Furthermore, in the early days of the pandemic, as supply chains crumbled under the unprecedented stress, VA was able to innovate as an integrated healthcare system. VA leveraged existing expertise and resources to not only 3D print nasal swabs, but also to manufacture the reagents needed for processing COVID-19 tests. One of my top priorities this Congress is ensuring that we honor the pact we've made with veterans, especially those exposed to toxic substances, and deliver the health care and benefits we have promised. I'm very pleased that last month the House passed my Honoring Our Pact Act, key legislation to finally treat toxic exposure as a cost of war. During the House's consideration, many of my colleagues decried the cost of helping our toxic exposed veterans, opting instead to support a smaller, less comprehensive bill that would inevitably leave some veterans behind. They argue that the cost of caring for our veterans is too great, and that year after year, VA's budget has ballooned. And while I'm pleased that the vast majority of this body saw through that false choice and voted to support the Honoring Our Pact Act, I'm concerned that this narrative has continued to survive in the Senate. What message are we sending to our nation's veterans when we break the sacred promise we've made to care for them and their families? So I'm heartened that the White House and the Department are strengthening their commitment to help these veterans, and I look forward to this legislation being considered in the Senate very soon. I'm also pleased to see President Biden and Secretary McDonough not only share my commitment to urgently address toxic exposure, but to propose funding to increase resources for new presumptive disability compensation claims and much-needed research. In addition, the President's budget includes $120 million to support automating disability compensation claims. This is necessary funding to help speed up benefits delivery for veterans. And while we still need to pass the Honoring Our Pact Act into law to get justice for these veterans, this proposed funding is a welcome step in the right direction. As we saw in last year's annual report, Congress and VA's efforts to meaningfully reduce veteran suicide are moving in the right direction, and I'm therefore very pleased to see this administration's continued commitment to addressing this issue. The fiscal year 2023 funding request of nearly $14 billion will allow VA to continue to grow its critical mental health and veteran suicide prevention programs. It is our country's diversity that strengthens us, and all veterans, regardless of age, gender identity, sexuality, or race, must have access to the care and benefits they've earned. More women are choosing VA health care than ever before, and under President Biden's request, more than $767 million will be directed toward gender-specific care for women veterans, a 9% increase over last year's budget level. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. While women veterans currently make up roughly 10% of veterans, by 2043, that number will grow to over 16%. In order to provide for all those who have served our nation, it is abundantly clear that VA's infrastructure needs to be updated. Most VA hospitals are over 50 years old, and it's clear there are places where the infrastructure is failing our veterans. And while I would like to see more, this budget request provides for $3 billion to address these challenges. However, we know much more will be needed to keep VA's place as a provider of world-class health care. The Asset and Infrastructure Review Commission, or AIR Commission, presents an opportunity to address this further and reshape the delivery of health care for veterans. However, we just have to make sure that that's what the AIR Commission actually does, and that it happens in a way that safeguards veterans' access to the high-quality, specialized care they've earned, no matter where they live, now and for generations to come. I had misgivings about the AIR Commission in 2018 when we were negotiating the Mission Act, but it was part of the bipartisan agreement that was reached. Every single Republican in the 115th Congress, including many of our current committee members, also voted in favor of this compromise. The Secretary's recommendations are based on data that I have questions about. Among other things, I'm concerned that the recommendations were formulated without fully considering shifts in healthcare delivery and changes in the private sector market that have occurred because of the pandemic. In addition, the Mission Act Community Care Program is still maturing. It was launched only about 9 months ago, 9 months before the pandemic, and the pandemic affected referral patterns in 2020 and 2021. VA's market assessments do not reflect this. Further, we know that our country's entire healthcare sector has been severely impacted over the last 2 years. So we must ensure that any assumptions about care outside VA reflect that reality. However, let me emphasize that this is not the time to panic. The Secretary's recommendations are only the first step in the process. The President's nominees for the Commission must still be confirmed by the Senate. I will be watching this process closely to ensure that we have fair-minded commissioners who will consider the voices of all stakeholders. And by law, these proposals to realign VA medical facilities will not become a reality without the full approval of the Air Commission, the President, and ultimately Congress. I look forward to hearing more from Secretary McDonough about these recommendations. To fully deliver on the promises we have made to our veterans, VA must improve its buildings and build new facilities closer to where veterans live, and ensure it has the workforce to staff them and the IT to support to keep them running, and the IT support to keep them running. I'm confident that VA is ready for this challenge, and we have a lot of work to do, but I have so much hope in the future of the VA under Secretary McDonough. With this budget request, it is clear to me that President Biden, Secretary McDonough, and I share many of the same priorities. I look forward to continuing our conversation today as we discern what this budget request forecasts for the future of VA. Thank you, and I now recognize Ranking Member Bost for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Secretary. And I also want to welcome the VSO witnesses that will be up later. You know, I would like, first off, for the witnesses to know I will be leaving the hearing for a short time towards the end to participate in a transportation infrastructure markup, and I appreciate the understanding of the people who are here. You know, Congress has always prioritized VA funding. We've approved 3 historic budget increases in a row. VA's fiscal year 2023 request is like nothing we've ever seen before. In total, $301 billion. That's $30 billion more than this year. It includes the largest discretionary increase ever. That's $22 billion, or nearly 19%. All of that is on top of nearly $20 billion from the CARES Act and $17 billion from the American Rescue Plan. I have many questions about the request. The budget materials do not seem to support the level of spending. For example, VA healthcare projection model supports a 13% increase, but the request is for a 19% increase. We've heard a lot about a rebound in healthcare demand from the pandemic. The VA's budget materials say the impact is $1.3 billion this year and $5.6 billion next year. But the requested increase is much larger than that. More importantly, the American Rescue Plan was supposed to pay for these increases. It just doesn't add up. Now, I'm even more concerned about what the budget fails to cover. As large as it is, it fails to tackle some of the most important issues VA is facing. The budget says VA facilities need as much as $88 billion of investments over the next 10 years. Yet, it only increases funding for construction and major maintenance by $1 billion to a total of $5.5 billion. The administration seems to be waiting for the Build Back Better and to tackle this problem. We could be starting addressing it already. So there's no excuse to wait. The ongoing asset and infrastructure review, or the AIR process, will help identify where to invest in the new buildings. In the meantime, we should prioritize maintenance. VA's budget request also does not include funding, Mr. Secretary, for your decision this week to extend presumption benefits for 9 rare cancers. It only funds presumption benefits for the 3 that were considered and announced on last August. Mr. Secretary, I applaud your efforts to use the authority you already have to determine presumptive conditions. That said, the budget cannot ignore the associated costs. Additionally, the budget does not even consider the work that Congress and VA have been doing expanding health care and benefits to veterans suffering from toxic exposures. The CBO estimate on the PACT Act which the administration is strongly supporting, will cost more than $325 billion, but the budget is silent on those costs and the operational impact of implementing the legislation. You know, I've been concerned about this for a long time. However, the budget does not account for any of this in 2023 or 2024. Finally, the VA and the White House are proposing to make the VA medical care its own budget category. That means taking it out of non-defense discretionary mix. Nothing like this has ever happened before. The overall VA budget is on track to reach $500 billion in 5 years. Agreeing to this proposal would mean putting discretionary spending on autopilot. If Congress did that, we would be ignoring the responsibility to determine priorities. I'm not comfortable with that. It is unnecessary, and it would undermine our ability to be accountable. Budgets are about more than numbers and dollars. Budgets have to reflect the actual needs and improve actual veterans' lives. We have an obligation to make sure veterans always receive the high-quality health care and benefits they deserve. I take my responsibility seriously to study VA's budget, justification, and determine if it would do that. At the end of the day, that will always be my standard. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I now recognize Secretary McDonough for his opening statement.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. Thanks as well to the VSO leaders here today for your partnership and your support. I'd like to begin with a story about one of VA's great employees, Nathan Hooker. Nathan is a National Guardsman who also serves as a VA cemetery representative in Illinois. We're always lucky to have Nathan on the team, but last July we were particularly fortunate because while Nathan was laying a veteran to rest, he heard an urgent radio call saying that an elderly woman had stopped breathing on the other side of the cemetery. It was a code red. She needed CPR and she needed it fast. Fortunately, years before he joined our team, Nathan had been trained in CPR to prepare for his deployment to Afghanistan. So, after hearing the code red, Nathan sprang into action, got to the woman quickly, and did what he had learned in training. After several compressions, things weren't looking good. The woman still was not breathing, and her lips were turning blue. But Nathan kept going, found and removed a blockage in her throat, and then, after one very long minute, she coughed. Then she took a breath. Then slowly regained consciousness, and Nathan talked to her until the paramedics arrived. Long story short, she's alive today because of Nathan, who on that last day of July, last July, helped us commemorate a veteran's life and then saved another life in a matter of minutes. That's what fighting like hell for our veterans looks like. And that's what VA employees do each and every day and have done throughout the pandemic, Mr. Chairman, as you said. Their great work has led VBA to process more than 927,000 veteran claims already this year, the fastest pace in VBA's history. It's led NCA to a point where we're approaching our goal of providing 95% of veterans with access to burial sites within 75 miles of their home. And it's led VHA to a point where outpatient trust scores are above 90%, and where studies show that we're delivering better outcomes than in the private sector. All told, we're now providing more care and more benefits to more veterans than ever before. But make no mistake, employees like Nathan can't do that great work unless they have the resources they need to do it. That's why this budget's so important. It'll not only help us continue down this path, but empower us to do even better for veterans, families, caregivers, and survivors. Specifically, this budget will help us get 38,000 homeless veterans into permanent housing by the end of this calendar year. It will help us deliver the toxic exposure benefits that veterans deserve as fast as possible by researching military exposure, hiring claims processors, and investing in claims automation. will help us save veterans' lives from suicide by expanding the Veteran Crisis Line, investing in lethal means safety, and funding local intervention programs. It will help us deliver for all vets, including women veterans, our fastest growing demographic, by investing the highest amount ever in our women's health program, which delivers tailored, world-class health care to women vets. It will help us save lives by investing nearly $1 billion in VA's groundbreaking research, including long COVID and cancer research. It will help us invest in our workforce, providing money we need to recruit and retain VA's great employees. And it will help us continue to save veterans from COVID-19, which is very much still here, very much still a threat for vets across the country. I could go on, but the bottom line is this. The number you see when you look at this budget is $301.4 billion. But what this budget really means is health care for an estimated 9.2 million vets, disability and survivor benefits for an estimated 6 million vets and their families, lasting resting places for an estimated 135,000 heroes and family members. What this budget really means is veterans' lives saved or improved by the work this funding makes possible. You know, President Biden often repeats a quote from his dad saying, "Show me your budget, and I'll tell you what you value." Well, this budget shows how deeply the president and our country values veterans, their families, caregivers, and survivors. They are the backbone of America. They deserve our very best, and with this budget, that's exactly what we'll give them. So thanks again for this opportunity to testify before you today and for your ongoing support as enunciated by the chairman and ranking member for veterans and the VA. I look very much forward to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Without objection, your written testimony in full will be included in the hearing record, and I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Mr. Secretary, I'd like to begin with a question related to, where my questions are. There they are, thank you. About the medical community care account. It's growing at a pace that's unmatched by any other account that is under the medical care umbrella. In the past, you and I, you actually have voiced the concerns over the sustainability of such significant growth. What analysis has VA done to identify the specific drivers behind the increases?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. We're in the midst of a pretty deep dive on the analysis of trends in the medical, the care in the community account under the medical account. We are on the hook to you all under the Mission Act to provide a report in June. I want to just heads you up that I think we can get it. I anticipate getting it to you in July. We'll be able to quantify in that account, or sorry, in that report, precisely what the experience has been over the course of these 3 years, what the kind of analogous analysis for the experience in the community has been, and what that means about the path forward. In the meantime, demand for access to the community has been high, as you and I have discussed both publicly and privately. That's an impact of the pandemic in the main. And we're going to continue, obviously, to fund that, and that's what this year's budget recognizes and asks for.
Well, I'll be interested when you know, as we move toward June, in the percentage of care being sent to the community under each of the various eligibility criteria, and I'm sure you'll be breaking it out. Let's move toward the market assessments that are related to the Air Commission.
Sure.
There are, you know, a lot of anxieties exist related to the methodology, the age of the data, the general lack of accounting for how the pandemic changed not only the way care is delivered, but also how it reshaped the actual care delivery structure across the country. When does VA plan to update the data. I recently read an article where a VA official was quoted as saying that the update is expected hopefully by October 2022. Do you have a timeline?
Yeah, thanks very much. This is a concern. Your concern is a concern I share. Since I got in this job, I've been looking very, very hard at these questions about whether the data that undergirds or makes the analytic basis, forms the analytic basis for the recommendations is accurate. This is why I asked a red team of well-regarded healthcare experts and former VA senior officials to take a look at the data. They came back with an answer that I feared, which is that they think the data is not up to speed in light of the pandemic. This is something that the GAO subsequently, after we made that conclusion, they came to a similar conclusion. So we've done the only thing allowed to us under the statute, which is we've set up a process whereby we will continually update over the life of the commission's consideration, which is from whenever the Senate confirms those commissioners until roughly next February. We'll make sure that we're giving the commission updated information on which they can make some assessments about our recommendations.
Well, thank you. I want to turn toward the PACT Act and presumptive conditions. I'm really pleased to see that VA did announce 9 new presumptive illnesses this week as part of President Biden's unity agenda. I want to ask about the budget assumptions related to toxic exposure made by the department in its fiscal year 2023 submission. I see the increase in anticipated mandatory spending during the fiscal year 2023 related primarily to the addition of 3 new respiratory illnesses announced in August of last year. However, your budget then assumes a decrease in comp and pen payouts in its fiscal year 2024 advance appropriation. Could you explain why you think you'll be paying less in fiscal year 2024, and does that number still hold given the department's announcement this week on 9 rare cancers?
Yeah, thanks very much for the question. So a couple things. One is we did witness something interesting in VBA last year, which is for the first time in several years, a reduction in claims filed. I think that was 21 over 20. That's the first time we've seen that, and that explains something that I've talked with Ranking Member Bost about, which is a concern that he had about overages or carryover in that account. That reduction in claims in 2021 over FY20 and then 2022 over FY21 explains why we had more left over at the end of the year. So that's one new analytic point for you all to keep in mind and that we're watching very closely. Second, how we manage that overage is anticipated in the statute too. Provided that that overage is within a certain limit laid out in statute, we can take and plow that back into our programming for the next year. And that means that would obviously come out of the top end of the president's request. So what we did this year is we plowed all that carryover back into FY23 because we anticipate, as you all were debating the PACT Act, that it looked to us like something was going to get enacted, and so it would be prudent for us to plow that money back into the VBA out-year request. What we cannot do is we can't front-run our internal process and make it look like we're just going through it without any scientific basis, and make it look like we know how those decisions are going to come out. That's all subject to rulemaking. It's all subject to public comment, for example. And so we wanted to make sure that we don't get ahead of that process as seriously as we take it. So bottom line is we have carryover. That carryover is partly reflected by a decrease in the number of requests. But at the end of the day, we're able to plow that investment back into VBA because we do anticipate an increase in the out years. We don't account for all of it because we don't know precisely yet what you all are going to do in the PACT Act at the end of the day. And we also can't prejudge this process that we're aggressively running, but again, running pursuant, consistent with the rules, per the rules. And so we're not going to front run any of that decision making.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. My time is way over, but I do have follow-ups, but I will submit those for the record.
Great.
I will now call on Ranking Member Bost for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I'm going to go down about the same path, I think, but, you know, as I said in my opening, I'm alarmed on how little the budget request reflects the work the VA and the committee has been doing together to address toxic exposures. You and I and Chairman Takano and our Senate colleagues have all, you know, made addressing toxic exposures our highest priority in this Congress. We know that the legislation under the consideration right now in the PACT Act would cost hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars. And that cost would be in addition to what you've already historical levels of funding have been requested in the budget. More importantly, we want that expanded health care and benefits for toxic exposed veterans to make sure that it would have, we know it'll have an enormous impact on the VA operation. We know that unless that we do it right, our best laid plans could lead to unprecedented claims and backlogs and longer wait times and all kinds of other problems. That would be a real harm to the veterans and future stress the VA workforce. And now I'm concerned about that, and I know that you are too, Mr. Secretary. But I appreciate opening communications that we're having with you in Congress. You have been very, very good about coming to me and others. But I don't think that Congress and VA have had anywhere close to the level of bipartisan, bicameral communication that we need as we work through on how to support veterans and suffering from toxic exposures. So, Mr. Secretary, my question is, I'm going to ask for you to agree to sit down with myself and Chairman Takano, Chairman Teskler, and Ranking Member Moran, if they're willing, to discuss how we can accomplish our goal for these veterans this year and avoid operational disaster.
Yep. Mr. Boss, thanks very much. You've got my commitment. I'd be more than happy to come join you for any meeting like that.
Well, thank you. Mr. Secretary, also, the VA budget materials say that the rebound in health care demand from the pandemic will cost about $1.3 billion this year. The American Rescue Plan is supposed to pay for those impacts. VA plans to spend about $12 billion on of the ARP funds this year. Why is VA spending $12 billion to fill a $1.3 billion hole?
Yeah, thanks very much. We've obviously been witnessing a kind of a return to care over the course of this last year. Really started in about March of 2021 of several veterans deferred care for a lot of different reasons. One reason I just want to call out, because I want to urge our veterans to not worry about this. A lot of veterans end up saying, hey, I'm not going to go in and take an appointment because I don't want to take it from somebody else. Right. Kind of traditional warrior ethos. I want vets to know we are here for you. We have plenty of care for you, and your care does not come at the expense of any other veteran. So please come in to get your care. We assess, and our model assesses, that even though it's been at a higher level since March 2021, we still haven't yet hit peak. And that's because as we are getting to peak, first Delta happened and then Omicron happened. So vets were dissuaded still. I think they should not be, and I urge them to not be, but they have been dissuaded. So we are not yet at peak levels. So I'm not ready to put a number on that. I'll go back and make sure I understand where the 1.5 comes from. I'm not ready to put a top level number on that. And we anticipate there's going to be more of that. Part of that is we're also seeing some of that spill into the community, as I said to Chairman Takano's first question. So the bottom line is we anticipate peak levels of care for a continued period, and we also anticipate more complicated care because people deferred coming in. And that's happening, by the way, in the country across the healthcare industry, not just at VA.
So, Mr. Secretary, also, you know, we're doing the Asset Infrastructure Review, or AIR process. Do you feel it's important for the long-term sustainability for the VA healthcare system to move forward with it?
Look, we've been arguing, the president's been arguing since we arrived that a healthcare system whose average whose average age of hospital is around 60 years is not consistent with the kind of care we want to deliver in the 21st century. And so we got a lot of hospitals that need to be updated. I think that the president's infrastructure request, the Build Back Better request, this year's budget request, last year's budget request, these are all the avenues, and their process are all avenues within which we can make those investments. And I think they're overdue.
All right. Well, thank you. My time is over, and I'll yield back, and if I have other questions, we'll submit them to the record as well.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. I now call on Health Subcommittee Chair Brownlee for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Secretary. It's great to see you this morning.
Nice to see you too.
I think you might think that I'm going to ask you a lot of questions around women veterans, but today I want to really focus on long-term care. So, first I want to applaud your efforts to putting a pause on the caregiver program and trying to figure that out and get it right. I think it's important that we do. But my frustration, kind of reviewing the budget and your testimony, is that we're not talking about other sort of home-based care programs, of which there are many, and that are very, very popular. Particularly the veteran-directed care program is extraordinarily popular. And my interest, while the caregiver program is focused on a small population of our veterans, very important, I'm looking for long-term care for both our disabled veterans, but just for our aging veterans who don't want to be in institutionalized care. They want to be have their care at home. So I think that I just want to kind of state that. Then when I look at the budget, there is for non-institutional care, the budget still remains at only 30% of the $12 billion requested for long-term care funding, while 70% continues to be spent on institutional care. So I'm wondering how we are expanding some of these home-based cares that veterans really want, and certainly I have a bill that incorporates everything that I'm talking about today, but the budget doesn't seem to be consistent with what hopefully your desire is. If you could just comment.
Yeah, Chairwoman, thanks very much, and I really appreciate the question. Right now in the VA system, 50% of our veterans are 60 years or older. And so when we talk about the costs associated with the medical care account, which grows at 18% this year, and I know it's a concern of the ranking member and other members, one of the things that we see is the cost of late life care and end of life care. We know that that's true in VA, but that's true in the U.S. healthcare system across the board, which is end of life care is very, very expensive. You're absolutely right that we are trying to skate to the puck here on where our veterans, like other Americans, want to be as it relates to healthcare. And they want to age in place. They want to age with their families. And I've gone through this. My family and I have gone through this. Now, when you have like 10 brothers, it's easier for us. I have very close friends right now who are wrestling with this with their aging parents. And we have a range. You highlighted one in the veteran-directed home care. We have respite care. We have a range of services. The challenge we face analytically is we can't just make this like the field of dreams, which is we build it and they will come. It may be the case, but that also may mean at the end of the year we have big carryovers, and you've just heard some of the pushback on carryover. And so what we are trying to do here is make sure through our social workers, make sure veterans are aware of the range of services, urge them or make sure that they understand their choices, make sure that they understand the attractiveness of the choices, and then build this over time based on the actual lived experience rather than on anticipatory take-up. And so I think that's the trick that we're trying to get around. If you have a way to help us think about that, I'm all ears. But what I can't afford to do in an account that is growing very fast, and it, as a result, engenders some pressure from up here on the Hill, as it probably should, I want to make sure that we are not overweighted on accounts where we're not seeing greater pickup. And so I hope that responds to your question.
It does, but I guess I disagree with some of your premises, and that first I think that in-home care, home-based care, at the end of the day is going to be less expensive than institutionalized care, number one. We know that health outcomes are better in home or in place, as you say, than institutionalized care.
Agreed.
And three, certainly, unless there is some improvement, there is not a good way for a veteran to go to the VA website and find out about all of these programs and to understand them and to be able to utilize them. So
yeah.
I think, the information flow is poor. And I think that at the end of the day, to accelerate this, because it is today where we have over 50% of our veteran population, as you said, are over 60 years old.
Yep.
It is important to accelerate the program, and it will, offset some of the budget strains that you're suggesting the budget has. So, we can talk about it a lot more, I know, but if you want to respond to that and, please.
I only want to respond because I so rarely disagree with you. So let me make sure that we're all talking about the same stuff here. One, I don't disagree substantively with anything you've just said. I do think that outcomes are better, costs are lower when vets can age in place. That's true. I think my guess is we've all experienced that. Long-term care under the president's proposal grows. Is about $12 billion total. That's an 8% growth. Institutional care is up 7%, 22 to 23. Non-institutional care is up 8.7%, 22 to 23. So my argument is we are trying to right-weight this. And I think you see the lion's share of the growth for FY23 is in non-institutional or home-based care. I wish we could do faster than that, because it may be that more vets will go faster to the home-based care options for the reasons that you suggest. It's just we don't have the data to allow us to grow more quickly in the home-based, non-institution-based care option here. So if you have a better way for us to model how to get there, I'm for it. It's just we're going there as fast as we can. Based on the data. And then look, I think you're right that one of the issues here is communication with our vets. This is why our social workers, who are really the unsung heroes of the VA system, are helping vets and families every day manage these variety of options. A lot of our vets are not solely dependent on VA. Those who are, obviously, that presents a different challenge, a different opportunity. But when a vet has a Medicare option, even in some cases a Medicaid option, a TRICARE option, and a VA option, I think our vets are and their families are overrun with optionality, and that's where the social workers become so important.
Well, I'm way over my time. I thank you. I'll ask you if you can make a promise to me that we can sit down and discuss this further.
I promise.
All right.
As long as we do it in your district. It seems a very nice place. Thank
you, Mr. Secretary, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back my negative time.
I'm guilty of crossing the time myself, so I can't throw stones here. But, I just want to say, I want to extend this conference. Chairman Brownlee, I just want to really give you a lot of praise for the direction you're taking on long-term care. It's something that the nation needs to deal with as a whole, and certainly it affects our veteran population very deeply. I do want to cite in our recent legislative hearing, our legislative markup, the wonderful bill that you and Clay Higgins worked on the long-term foster care approach. That is another tool in the toolbox. So, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that you're bringing to this topic and on the bipartisan basis this committee is doing. I now want to call on General Berg, Ms. Radewagen for 5 minutes. Ms. Radewagen?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Talofa, Secretary McDonough.
Hello?
Due to quarantine measures affecting access to off-island care, the veterans in my home district have had what I feel is more difficulty than most in securing medical appointments as we adjust to the new normal of a post-COVID world. First, does VA have any plans in place to address lapses in long-term or preventative care due to missed appointments and pandemic-related scheduling issues? And second, how widespread is the action of the VA canceling and rescheduling appointments without the agreement of the veteran or being offered community care options? Can this lead to the appearance of shorter wait times versus the actual real wait time a veteran is experiencing? What is the VA doing to fix this, Mr. Secretary?
Thank you very much for the question, and Talofa, to you. One is we have been throughout the pandemic, and I say we here carefully, I guess, because I was not here when a lot of this work was being done, have been trying to remain in contact directly with veterans so that we can make sure that they are aware of what their options are and how they can get their options addressed. So that's one. That work continues. The log of deferred care is, as I just said to Mr. Bost, a major priority for us, as it is for healthcare providers across the country, whether they're VA or private sector providers. And I feel like we are making good progress on that, in part because every veteran now, in light of the pandemic, almost every veteran has already found himself or herself over a particular wait time because, again, the pendency of the pandemic, making them eligible for referral to the community. And so that's one of the reasons, in response to Chairman Takano's question, we are seeing as much uptake in the community as we are. Now, this issue of wait times is one that we spend a lot of time on. In fact, I just had the senior most policy-making body meeting in VA on this topic earlier this week. And we will be in the process coincident with the publication of our report in June or July around the 3 years of experience with the Mission Act and updating those wait time calculations, which I have testified to this committee and to the Senate, has been a source of frustration for me personally for some time. That's a frustration that's born of the fact that VA does something no other healthcare system does, which is we actually do keep track of how long it takes a veteran to get access to care. There is not an industry standard to do this. So what we're doing is brand new. We're doing something nobody else does. And so it's actually kind of difficult. I think we've landed on a good solution that's now in the process of being executed, and you'll see the fruits of that over the course of these next couple of months. It is not frustration from the fact that I believe anybody is trying to mislead anybody, and this goes to your second question, which I think suggests, I'm not trying to suggest your premise, but as I heard it, it suggested that somehow we wanted to weight answers one way or the other so as to create an appearance of performance. I don't really give a hoot. I'm glad I caught myself there. about appearance. Here's what I care about. What does a vet think? And here we do have data. At va.gov/trust, we publish on a quarterly basis our trust data. And that's data from people I do care about, vets. And on the question, do you feel like you were able to get in on your appointment? I can't remember the precise, this is now paraphrased, at a time that was consistent with your desires. We score mid-80s on that. Now it's a B. I'm generally, I tell my kids to get better than Bs, but I was kind of Bs and Cs. The B's good, but it's not where we need to be. So with this data we'll publish, with this trust score data, I want to make sure that vets know at the end of the day what their experience is the deciding one here. They should know their options. We make sure they know their options. And the goal here is to be transparent with you, with the Senate, with the press and the public, but also to be entirely responsive to the vet.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Radwagen. I now call on Vice Chairman Levin for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for all your great work for our veterans. It was particularly nice to have you in our district last week. I want to thank you for spending that time with us, and also particularly appreciated the conversations that we had with our local veterans and our community leaders. One of the points that you made that I thought was very important is that VA intends to house at least 38,000 veterans during this calendar year. Can you clarify if this solely represents permanent housing through HUD-VASH or if it also includes transitional housing?
No, the goal is in this calendar year 2022, we intend to get 38,000 homeless veterans into permanent housing. That does not include, for example, vets who we prevent from falling into homelessness, which is also a very big priority for VA, but also for federal agencies across the board, given the President's intense focus on this, and given your all's generosity, Republicans and Democrats, in giving us budget authority, dollars to invest in this.
Thank you. I'm encouraged we're going to keep working together on this to get this right. How do you think VA can best recruit and retain case managers, strengthen landlord engagement, and ultimately increase HUD-VASH voucher utilization?
Well, I do think that, as you and I discussed with many of the local leaders there in San Diego, I think that the case workers, social workers who are in touch with landlords to make sure that they understand how the HUD-VASH program works is really important. The way we do that is we make sure that we understand that the people we're hiring, recruiting, and ultimately retaining understand that they're part of a team. And that team is a federal team across the federal enterprise. We work very closely with HUD, HHS, and others, but also with state officials, local officials, and ultimately nonprofit and non-governmental local officials. Making sure that our caseworkers understand they're part of that team. That's how places like Houston, Texas, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, New Orleans have gotten ahead of this problem and gotten to functional zero in many of those places, not all of them, I've just said, for veteran homelessness. I want to make sure that those caseworkers understand they're part of that team, and then that team works well together.
Thank you, and as I mentioned, I won't stop until we get there in San Diego as well, and appreciate your assistance in that regard. Wanted to turn to SSVF. I was pleased that your budget request includes an increase in funding for SSVF, and VA notes this funding will support the nationwide expansion of shallow subsidy, as well as increasing the benefit from 35% to 50% of reasonable rent. I think it's especially important for preventing veterans and their families from falling into homelessness by providing rental assistance and case management when needed to maintain housing stability. Hopefully, VA will have data soon demonstrating evidence of the efficacy of doing this. Do you have any idea when VA will provide this data?
Let me take that. I don't know that off the top of my head, so let me get an answer to you later today.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Wanted to also highlight the main issue that veterans raised during our roundtable in Oceanside last week, and that's the transition from military to civilian life. VA is responsible for ensuring positive outcomes after separation. The DoD, of course, leads the Transition Assistance Program, which can lead to a disconnect between each agency's priorities and duties. And as you mentioned last week, commanding officers are focused on retention and readiness, rightfully so, and separating service members don't check either of those boxes. Do you think VA needs a greater role in the transition process?
You know what, I don't, but it's an issue that you and I have talked about. I've talked at length with General Bergman about. He understands this very well from the other side of the street. So I'm trying not to prejudge the outcome here. The Joint Executive Committee, which is the Joint DoD VA committee, which is co-chaired by the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness on the DoD side and by Deputy Secretary Remy on our side. We're looking at this issue top to bottom. Our Veteran Experience Office is also looking at this as it relates to human-centered design to try to make sure that we don't think about the TAP program as the only way that a veteran, given all the things, or a transitioning service member, all the things that she's working through at that time, that we just have to hope we catch them at the right time. Let's make sure that we develop our programming responsive to their life and their needs rather than to our programming. So we're looking at all these questions, and I hope we'll have something concrete there. And as I say, I think several members of this committee have very concrete real-life experience to help us through that.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary. I'm out of time for now, but I look forward to continued dialogue with you and your team, and thank you for all your good work. And I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman Levin. I'm just amazed, 38,000. That's a huge number, Mr. Secretary. My congratulations, and just.
Well, let's make sure we hold the congratulations until we do it.
I hear you. I hear you. I just want to just say how moved I am by your commitment and the pledge. General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Secretary. I truly appreciate your direct, candid responsiveness. It's a breath of fresh air. This year's budget, fiscal year 2023, has about $13.9 billion in it for mental health and suicide prevention programs, which, as I understand, is still your top clinical priority. Thank you for that. What improved outcomes, including lower suicide rates and lower dropout rates from mental health treatments, do you expect that level of investment to result in?
Well, the big moving piece here analytically is our year-on-year suicide numbers, right? And so that's one we track closely. You're familiar. I don't need to talk you through the most recent numbers, but we're tracking those. Another data point that we are tracking is access to mental health in the first instance. Now, that's in many ways an input rather than an outcome, but given how tight the market is for mental health care providers in particular, we're working through, we still want to measure that objective as well, measure that as an objective, even though it's not in a kind of most traditional sense an output, it's actually an input. The third and maybe last thing I'll say on this for the moment is, the other thing is we need more mental health care providers. And so there's a risk here on this, on focusing on that number, which is that right now we're moving among Peter and Paul here a very precious resource, which is those mental health care providers. We see it inside VA between our vet centers and big VA, as we call it. We have a therapist who can work at the vet center, which is a great retail, community level healthcare, timely given in a community. Oftentimes within a week of somebody turning up, they're back for care. Those therapists top out at a GS-11, doing a very similar position at VA Medical Center at the hospital. They're a GS-12. That's a well-trodden path between the 11s at the vet center going over to the hospital to be a 12.
Okay.
I'm worried about that. So that's the third thing is, are we getting the numbers, and are those numbers additive rather than just moving around in the system? And that's a national challenge for us.
So, as to kind of restate what you said for a second here, because I know our time is going to go fast. Given that suicide is multifaceted,
Yes.
and the prevention is prioritized across and throughout the VA, it's not what I heard you say was that you're looking at it throughout the entire VA system, not just the VA healthcare system, because there are tentacles
Absolutely.
that run between. Okay, thank you. No, we don't have much time left here, but my bill, the Improve Wellbeing for Veterans Act, was signed into law as part of the Hannon Act. It requires VA to provide grants to community groups that provide suicide prevention services to veterans. That is critical in preventing veteran suicide, since we know that the majority of these veterans who take their lives are outside the VA system. How are we doing on because the grants are supposed to start rolling out this year,
Yeah.
and you can take this for the record, don't care, but I think we're going to need an update sooner rather than later from you all to complete that cycle, because if we're putting money into something, we need to make sure that we're getting the outreach to these veterans as intended who are outside the system. So
Yeah.
at some point, when you can provide feedback.
I'll give you a quick answer now, and then I'll get you a better answer, which because it'll be from people who know stuff. But one, we put out notice of funding opportunity on this, I think, 2 weeks ago. So that's in the community. We should be getting requests, funding proposals, and then that money will be in communities in the fall. We want it obligated before the end of this fiscal year. So does that mean we obligate it in September, but it actually doesn't hit the street till October? Possible, but we want to make sure that we're getting this money in this out in communities, obligated to the communities by the end of fiscal 2022, which is by September 30.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I'll yield 2 seconds back.
Well, thank you for being such a good example, General. I've set such a bad one. I now recognize Chairman Pappas for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Takano. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with the committee today, and I appreciate your many efforts and initiatives that I think are having a positive impact on veterans. I want to build off one of the concerns that Chairman Takano raised about the Air Commission. I want to state as strongly as I can that I believe, and I think the veterans in New Hampshire believe, that the recommendations as they pertain to the state of New Hampshire would really have a negative effect on access to health care and outcomes. And we want to do all we can to make sure that the data that the Air Commission has is as full as possible. I think you alluded to this in your response to Chairman Takano, but making sure that we're looking at all facets of the supply and demand for healthcare, as well as looking at the cost of community care, is really important to get the full picture. So I appreciate your commitment to doing that and make sure the Air Commission has all the data they need to be evaluating this and to be measuring the impact on veterans in a state like mine. So thank you. I want to ask about the issue of claim sharks. We had a hearing yesterday. It was a joint hearing between the DAMA and the O&I subcommittees. I thought it was really educational about these bad actors that are out there, unaccredited, beyond the reach of VA, that are sometimes charging thousands of dollars for benefits for veterans to file claims. We all know that the accreditation program is there to help ensure that veterans get the assistance that they need in filing these claims. I'm wondering if you can comment on the activities in the Office of the General Counsel. They're aware of, this problem of these unaccredited actors. I know they've sent out cease and desist letters. Would additional resources be helpful in ensuring that VA can better enforce laws, or do you have any ideas about how we can address this problem of these unaccountable actors that are out there that I think are taking advantage of our veterans?
Yeah, look, I have the same reaction you do to them. It's disgusting, and I'm proud of the work that the Office of General Counsel has been doing on this. You did cite the cease and desist letters. I think most recently, I think was as recently as just last week, which I think should suggest to you that we are actively watching this. I'll take the question about whether we have, whether we need more resources. My instinct is that we don't, but let me take that and ask our team that. I think at the end of the day, something that we can do kind of across the board is make ourselves more responsive to veterans in the first instance, more responsive to all of the actors, so that veterans don't, feel desperate and feel like they have to go to some of these other actors. But which I take that as an execution and performance challenge to us. But I'll take that resource question and report back.
Well, thank you. We know there are VSOs and attorneys who are out there who are accredited, who provide great service for veterans. And
Definitely.
I think as much education as we can provide so veterans know where to turn, that's an important piece of this as well. So I want to ask a final question about VA whistleblowers. Obviously, you share a commitment to whistleblowers and those who voice concerns over the serious problems that can arise. I think too often, as we know, it's been accounted for, whistleblowers have faced retaliation despite having the courage to come forward and do the right thing. I've had conversations with many officials in the department who lead the effort to improve the plight of VA whistleblowers, but it seems that needed improvements are moving along far too slowly. For example, I was shocked to learn that only about a third of the supervisors and officials who were known to have retaliated against whistleblowers have received any disciplinary action. So I'm wondering if you can reflect on this problem and if it's something you're continuing to work to address.
Yeah, thanks very much. I mean, you've been tireless on this. I appreciate very much the additional tools that you and this committee has given us on this. But your personal focus on this and frankly, the pressure that you keep on the department is helpful in that regard. One, two, it's a major priority for me. And all my communication with the workforce, going back to my first communication with the workforce, I've underscored the importance of whistleblowers, of the Office of Whistleblower Accountability and Whistleblower Protection, and the IG, all of whom I consider to be important partners. Three, not only have I verbalized that, but I meet on a regular basis, monthly with the IG himself, monthly with the with Assistant Secretary Donahue herself. Four, I've been watching the data that you've been highlighting. This is the first time I've heard this 1/3 data point, so I'll take that and study that. I know that you were focused, for example, on the time to pay out settlements, for example. I kind of have a different way of looking at that data, but you're continuing to flag it for me gives me another point of leverage to go back and ask questions on this. I think we're serious about it. I know I'm serious about it. I think we're using the tools that you've given us. And I continue to believe that VA personnel feel empowered to come forward, which is ultimately the most important thing. But I want to keep an open line with you, and if you feel that that's not the case, that we have an opportunity to address that.
Well, thanks for your attention to the matter, and we'll stay in touch on it, certainly. I yield back.
Thank you.
I now recognize Mr. Banks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, the recommendations by the VA to the Air Commission would have significant effects in Fort Wayne, Indiana, the largest community in my district. Can you give us I know the commission has come up a number of times, but can you give us an update on the process, how it's going so far? Are we behind schedule? Are we ahead of schedule? Are we going to meet the January 31, 2023 deadline to the president?
Yeah, so thank you. It's a great question, and I appreciate it. I think Indiana overall, there's a lot of changes in Indiana as well. Net, I think it looks like a state, according to the data, with all the caveats that, going back to the chairman's point, all the caveats that apply, looks like a high-growth state over the course of the next 3 decades. Now that I understand the concern about Fort Wayne. One, two. Right now, there are, I think, 8 nominees pending in the Senate. There's supposed to be 9. The statute envisions the all the nominees coming from the president, but I think the statute envisions, consistent with long-term practice up here, I think, that 5 of those nominees come from the president directly, and then 4 of them come from the elected leaders of the chambers, House and Senate, Republican and Democrat. So I think we're still waiting on one of the nominees, I think from Senator McConnell. And then it's really a question for the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee as to when those all 9 of those are subject to advise and consent. So it's a question of how quickly they do that. We are behind. Those were to have been submitted to the committee in May 2021. It's April 2022. They're pending but not yet agreed to, and one is as yet not submitted. So, third point, the statute doesn't really, the statute has pretty hard and fast dates in it. And this is one of the constraints I felt, which is why eventually I asked for a little extra time to send my recommendations, and I sent them, even though the other work has not been done by the Republican leader in the Senate. I don't think the commission, I don't think the statute envisions the commission meeting after January 2023. And then the president's on a tight timeline, and then you're all on a tight timeline. So I think the longer this kind of hangs out there, the less time they have to look at the recommendations. And while I think I did good work, there's a high probability that I screwed something up, so I hope the commission has enough time to look at my work.
So you agree that with time ticking away, we're doing a disservice to this process by asking them to do their work in
I don't want to
abbreviated
I don't want to
period of time.
characterize disservice or service. I do want to say that
But we expect that this is a very important process. We're making, this commission is going to make recommendations that have impacts on veterans all over the country, and in my case, substantially in Indiana. And we're asking them to do this in a very short period of time. Should we expect that you, Mr. Secretary, the administration would come back and ask Congress to extend this, this January 31, 2023 deadline? Give the commission the time that they need to get the work
If,
done?
you know, just in full candor, Mr. Banks, that's not something I'm thinking about at the moment, but I just finished the first round of work that was on my plate. I feel like I volleyed across the net here. I think the founders envision now, or the founders envision your work here, but you all in enacting the statute put yourselves on a timeline, and my guess is it's time for you guys to get to
You're
work.
raising some significant concerns that I think need to be addressed. And furthermore, with the recommendations to close the VA inpatient hospital in Fort Wayne, Indiana, you can imagine that this causes a significant disruption among the staff at the hospitals. They don't know what's going to happen to their jobs. How is the VA addressing, with the staffing shortages and the concerns that we have nationally anyway, how are we addressing this uncertainty that a lot of our employees have?
I think it's a great question. This is why I asked you all for the additional time before submitting my recommendation, so we could talk to our healthcare professionals in the field, including in Fort Wayne. I think that what we have talked to our staff about, and I think I hope our staff understand, is that nobody's going to be without a job, because in all cases we anticipate demand for the people that we have now. 1, 2 is this is the beginning of the process, and the commission itself has to make some conclusions. And so we're staying very close to our healthcare professionals on this. As I've said, that's why we rolled out our human infrastructure project in early February before we proceeded with this physical infrastructure project, because at the end of the day, we need both. In particular, in this market, we need the healthcare professionals.
Thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. I now recognize Mr. Mervan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your commitment to the veterans. It's always good to see you as chairman of the Technology Modernization. Just have a few questions about claims modernization.
Yeah.
Mr. Secretary, was happy to see the delivering benefits for veterans and investing in additional claims processors and modernization efforts is a priority of yours. I've heard from many VBA employees that they feel they are long overdue for the investment in IT. I also understand that VBA employees are weary of any type of funding surrounding automation because they are worried about their jobs. I know that you aren't advocating for replacing our workforce with automation, but can you explain further the steps that the VA is going to take to ensure the VBA employees are getting a tool to enhance how they work and not replace their work?
Yeah, fair enough. And look, at the end of the day, so you make 2 points. On the first point, if there's particular technology needs that you're hearing from our workforce that they're not getting, I hope you'll share that with us, and I'll make sure that we get attention to that. Obviously, as chairman of that subcommittee, you're spending a lot of time looking at this, you and your team, and so you may be getting data that's very useful to us, so please share that data. Second, on automation, as we've been I've wanted to be very transparent about this for obvious reasons, right? Which is that the one you raise. I think when we get into questions about technology and automation, I think history's rife with examples where people feel like they've been cut out of opportunity because of technology. That's not our intention. So, one, we're being transparent and communicating with the workforce. I'm being transparent with you all. Two, the process that we have in place envisions adding 3 new conditions per quarter to our automation process so that we can test and prove concept over time. Third, we envision in all cases that these are ultimately human-based decisions at the end of the day. The automated processes help us go get, collect, collate information and package it so as to facilitate rapid, ultimate human decision-making. Fourth, as we've talked kind of throughout this conversation, throughout this hearing and many other hearings and other fora, we have a lot of need for experienced professionals across the VA system and, of course, in VBA. And making sure that veterans, that we're communicating clearly to veterans, we're in touch with veterans, we're establishing good outreach to veterans to ensure that they know what they qualify for and the benefits that they have earned are available to them. And so there's going to be needs for us over time in all of this. And in any case, the period at which the new automated process becomes assumes a greater role for us is in kind of indeterminate period in the future. So we have to drive to that because I think there is a way for us to do this more quickly for veterans. We can't do it without the humans, and we don't know when we're going to get there. So we got to do all our work between now and then.
Being an eternal optimist, with the passage of the PACT Act, we can partner on efforts to continue to modernize IT with the VBA and provide employees modern tools to provide timely and accurate benefits to veterans. Will the VA also be looking to modernize the Veterans Benefits Management System in the next fiscal year?
I have to take that one to make sure. I know we have in VBA right now, we have a series of very big tech projects. I don't know exactly the timeline on any VBMS work, so I'll take that back.
Additionally, Mr. Secretary, attorneys at the Board of Veteran Appeals have highlighted their need for new IT and the need for modernization to the caseflow system. To better enable them to serve veterans, will VBA be looking to update that system as well?
We are right now. We have a big challenge, which is that we got to figure out how to get appeals in the context of the caregiver program, which is a VHA program, into a VBA or board-based technology system. We're working that through right now. In fact, we're meeting downtown at the board right now with VSOs on the caregiver program. We're obviously working very closely with you and your staffs on that program. But we need both judges and more judges, and we need technology upgrades. So exactly when we'll be coming to you on the technology upgrades, I don't have news on that right now.
I thank you, and I yield back my time.
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mervan. I now recognize Mr. Moore for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Secretary. I want to kind of echo what General Bergman said. I appreciate you answering the questions forthcoming like you do. And so the first question I have is it correct that some portion of the spending that was initially funded by the American Rescue Plan Act will continue forever? And if it will permanently increase the VA's budget by $6 billion, if that's the case, can you explain why?
Some of the $6 billion number is not front of mind to me, so I'll make sure that I get that number for you. One, two. One of the things we've been able to do with the American Rescue Plan money is hire people, and so inevitably, those salaries will continue for some time, right? And so that might account for what you see in terms of increased outlays over time. So that would be, and I think the logic follows there, that if we used ARP money or even CARES Act funding to fund, we've had a 7% growth in our workforce over the course of the last 3 years in the context of the pandemic. We need those healthcare professionals. I want to keep them. It's a super tight market, and we're going to need more of them, especially if we're headed where we think we're headed on the PACT Act, in which case it's reasonable to expect, I believe, that people we hired even last year, we're going to have to pay in 2 years' time and 3 years' time. So there's going to be continuation over time on that.
I got you. And I guess, too, in this budget we're looking at, are we looking at any cost-saving opportunities? Because, some of us understand that more we spend, inflation obviously becomes a problem. And it makes salaries go up, transportation costs, everything goes through the roof.
Yep.
And so are you looking at some areas maybe that you could help save going forward to kind of help us do our job as well and kind of curb some of this inflation and runaway spending?
Totally. Look, I mean, I think there's a lot of, I think there's places where we're looking to save, even on a big priority for us, like mental health, for example. We're at basically even funding year on year. And people say, wait a minute, how is it done? Your number one clinical priority, you're not growing. Well, we don't necessarily have to grow when, for example, one of the things that we've changed is we've moved our interagency coordination hub, which used to be based in VA. My view is that interagency coordination doesn't work well. It was called the Prevents team. It doesn't work well from an agency because I, as Secretary of VA, have no leverage on Secretary Becerra to give us more people. But when it's run out of the White House, that is a well-run, nobody's demonstrated that better than General Schoolcraft back in the day. If that's the case, we shouldn't be spending extra money to run the Prevents program from our office. So that's how we save some money year on year, even on our number one clinical priority. Another one, we're getting better now in the community care network on paying. We're basically on clean claims for somebody who from your district ends up in the community. We're basically now rivaling Medicare on payment of those clean claims. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, that was not the case. We were slow. I'm sure you heard from providers, and my guess is you still hear from providers that we're slow. But once we get to be better payers, I think we should then start thinking about pay for performance, bundling, other things that say over time, there's a more cost-efficient way to provide care in the system and in the community that saves taxpayers dollars and does not compromise care or timeliness for veterans. So yeah, we're looking for opportunities to save.
And I'm sure we'll appreciate that. And I understand the labor force challenges. We're seeing it across any industry. It doesn't, just not healthcare, obviously, with COVID has been kind of an interesting hiccup. But are you losing people with the vaccine mandates? Can you tell me kind of what's going on there? I know some people that walked away from the industry that have been, they were there before the jab was required, before it even existed, and many have been asked to walk away from their jobs or being terminated. Can you tell me what's going on with the VA in that?
It's a great question. So we have, so far we have terminated 6 people in our system. Let's say about 380,000 roughly are subject to the healthcare mandate that I put in place under Title 38, which is entirely my own authority. 6 of those people have been terminated. 1 for refusing to give supervisors vaccine data at all. 4 for refusing to wear a mask in healthcare setting.
I'm running close on time. Were there any exemptions given?
So about 10% of people have asked for exceptions. Okay, we call them exceptions rather than exemptions. I've said we're not going to challenge the legitimacy of the exception. I'm not going to look under the hood and say, do you really believe what you say you believe? But we have said there are certain functions in VA that are so clinically important. ICU, for one, oncology, for one, where we say, I'm sorry, we can't, it's so important for us to say to vets we've done everything we can to protect their safety that we are going to ignore your exception. This is a source of considerable consternation. I just had a very spirited conversation with an excellent nurse in the ICU in Kentucky on Friday. Our nurses, there's nurses who feel really strongly about this. I told her I would take her concerns on board. I've discussed those with Dr. Lieberman. We're continuing to discuss them. But as it stands right now, we're continuing to force the mandate. In those places where we believe patient safety requires it, we're sticking to our guns and not allowing the exception.
With that, Mr. Chairman, I went over my time. I apologize, but I'll yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Ms. Underwood, you're recognized for 5 minutes. Ms. Underwood?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. VA's fiscal year 23 budget submission includes critical investments that have been top priorities for me as a member of both the Veterans Affairs Committee and the Appropriations Committee, including funding to prevent suicide among veterans. Within the nearly $500 million that VA requested for veteran suicide prevention initiatives, the department included an emphasis on funding to support a lethal means safety campaign in partnership with other agencies. The budget notes that, quote, reducing access to lethal means, including firearms, is one of a few universal suicide prevention strategies supported by evidence. Based on this evidence, the Trump administration implemented a requirement for all VHA clinicians to complete VA's lethal means safety training, resulting in a completion rate of more than 90%. However, this training remains optional for all other VA employees, as well as community care providers and family caregivers, resulting in a completion rate of less than 1%. Mr. Secretary, I know we've discussed this issue throughout your tenure. Most recently, on April 19th, I sent you a letter asking you to use your existing authorities to expand VA's life-saving, evidence-based lethal means safety training requirement. Can you provide an update on your plans to implement this requirement for all VA employees who regularly interact with veterans in their work, including at VHA, VBA, and vet centers?
Thanks very much, Congresswoman Underwood. And I want to thank you again for your work on getting the RAISE Act included in the omnibus. I've said this to the chairman as well. And, you know, I was just discussing with Mr. Moore that tight labor market has really been a challenge for us with nurses. So you've given us a new authority and new funding. That's great. Now we need it for med center directors, for physicians and others. So thank you for that. One. Two, I can get you an update on our requirement for our vet-facing staff in the community. I should have that, but I apologize that I don't. The place where you and I may end up disagreeing is on how we implement that requirement on our community providers. What we have found is that it's extraordinarily difficult and extremely administratively burdensome to do so. And I hate to sound not crass, but unempathetic and unsympathetic, but imposing this mandate on the providers in the community is something I've talked with Chairman Takano about for other purposes as well, is proving to be very, very difficult in all candor to implement. And so I don't have a good answer for you on that. It's difficult for us to impose those kind of mandates on the community. And we're looking at different ways to do it, and we've not kind of cracked that safe yet. But we'll continue to look at it.
Great, because this is a strong priority. And as we continue to take action to address suicide among our veteran population, we cannot discount the role of providers' preparedness to have a life-saving conversation.
Agreed.
Now, recognizing that lethal means safety is a top clinical priority for VA, and the #1 component of the Biden-Harris administration's national strategy for reducing military and veteran suicide. Will you commit to working with me to find a way forward? I think that we can continue to talk, yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. So in November of 2021, I was proud to stand next to you as President Biden signed my Protecting Moms Who Served Act into law, which is a bipartisan bill that provided $15 million in authorization to strengthen VA's maternity care coordination programs and ensure our veterans receive world-class maternal health care and support. I was pleased to see VA's budget includes $767 million for gender-specific care for women veterans, including funding for maternity care coordination. Mr. Secretary, VA's budget proposal notes that maternity care costs are rising for the department as utilization increases with the growing enrollment of younger female veterans. Given these trends, can you expand on the importance of fully funding the authorization from my bipartisan Protecting Moms Who Served Act through the fiscal year 2023 appropriations process?
Look, I think that we have to, I mentioned trust scores earlier today. Our trust scores are least good, meaning are bad, among the younger and the more female the population is, meaning we have to do a better job of engendering trust among our women veterans, especially our younger women veterans. The best way to do that is to provide care, especially in the places where young women veterans are looking for that care. And so maternity care is an example of that. Assistive reproductive technology, IVF, is a place that we need to do that. And access to gynecological services, not as some kind of specialty care. This is standard preventive basic care. Doing that is, I think, the pathway toward us getting more younger women veterans in our care sooner. And the reason to do that is veterans in our care do better over time. And so I agree with everything that you've said, and we're going to use every tool that we have to do this.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman Underwood. Mr. Rosendale, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, Secretary. Good to see you.
Good morning, and nice to see you.
The development of an electronic health record system works effectively with DoD and can be easily used by the providers is a great concept. It absolutely is. However, when we first met last year in hearings, and in my office personally, you assured this committee that the Cerner EHR system would not be introduced in other facilities until it was fully functional at man-grant staff. Since that time, we've seen 700 patient safety reports. We've got 80% of the employees at man-grant staff that were polled and state that they would prefer to work somewhere else as a direct result of the Cerner EHR system. They've experienced over 50 system shutdowns, 2 this week alone. And the pharmacies have been forced to use dangerous workarounds, which contributed to, if not caused, a recent cardiac event and hospitalization of a veteran that easily could have caused their death. Why are you breaking your pledge to this committee and forcing this failed experiment, a multi-billion-dollar failed experiment, into other facilities at this time?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Rosendale, and I've always appreciated our very candid and open line. You highlighted a couple of them, the instances, and I'd add to that the really good trip we had to Fort Harrison together, and I really appreciate your openness to that. 2, I appreciate the care and the precision that you apply to the oversight of the execution of this program. 3, nobody's madder and more anxious about the 5 shutdowns in the system since March 3rd than I am. In fact, the first was so egregious that engendered it resulted in a signed written apology from the Cerner CEO. So I'm very concerned about the execution of the program to date. Your attention to that, Mr. Mervan's attention to that, Chairman and Mr. Boss' attention to that helps strengthen our hand in that effort. Last point, and we will continue to hold Cerner accountable for that, particularly these shutdowns, which our Assistant Secretary for Information Technology underscores are very significant engineering challenges. So I'm concerned about that. What I've communicated to you and to this committee is that we will proceed based on the experiences in man-grant-staff and based on the experiences as we go from site to site, that we'll be fully candid and transparent with you about that. Part of that process to date has identified a particular challenge with the pharmacy function. I've just been reassured again as recently as this morning that Cerner is working that issue. And if I assess any of this to create a threat to our veterans, that I won't proceed. But to date, the experience and the learnings from man-grant-staff strengthen our ability to go to Walla Walla. The experience in man-grant-staff in Walla Walla continue to strengthen our ability to go to Columbus, which we are scheduled to do tomorrow evening. And we'll stay on top of this, but you won't be surprised by our decisions, and you won't be wondering the basis on which we're making the decisions, and we'll continue to lean on your aggressive oversight on this.
So, again, we were assured, you pledged to us that this system would not be introduced in other facilities until it was fully functional at man-grant-staff, and it's not. We have a list of life-risking, events that continue to take place to this very day. They had documentation that was wrong for patients. It was one patient's name and another patient's information that was on these forms, so that the doctors and physicians and the treating physicians cannot even rely upon the information that they're reviewing to practice medicine. This is risking lives. Why would we continue to expand it and introduce it to other facilities until your pledge to us, we have a fully functional system at man-grant-staff?
Look, again, my commitment to you is that if I ever have any reason to think that this is creating risk for our patients, then we won't do it.
But Secretary, we had an article in the Spokane Review.
I read it closely,
that we had a cardiac event, and that's just one that we were able to identify, that a veteran had to be hospitalized and could have very easily lost life.
Yep. Look, obviously, I'm very worried about that story and very worried about that incident, and our team is all over it. And so again, my commitment is the only reason to do this is if it has clinical value and improves outcomes for our veterans. Our clinicians continue to believe that it will and that it does. If it ever stops being the case, then I'll come here and I'll tell you that we're not going to proceed. But I don't have a basis on which to make that decision yet. But all of the instances that you point out, these are things that in many cases our people themselves identified and reported and acted to correct. And it's in that process that we're getting better on this. And at the end of the day, we owe the vets the better clinical outcomes, the better claims outcomes, the more efficient care, and we owe the taxpayer the more cost-effective care over time for our veterans that has come out of every system that has moved to electronic medical health records. That's the basis on which I think you all agreed to the contract, in 2017? 18. In the first instance. And so we're executing that, believe me, let me just say one more time. The first shutdown on March 3rd engendered a written apology. There's been 4 since then.
You're making my point. You're literally making my point for me.
Wait, then let's stop now while you and I are both agreeing.
Mr. Chair, I would yield back, but I would ask, are we going to do another round of questions? Because I would like to go into the financial aspects of this as well.
One round with the secretary, and we have another panel with the independent budget VSOs.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Mr. Rosendale. I'll make myself available to come talk to you whenever you want.
Thank
So
you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back.
it's mostly fun talking to you, but it's always learning.
Mr. Rosendale, thank you for your line of question. I think members on both sides of the aisle have concerns. And so, Mr. Secretary, I appreciate that you're here to answer the questions. I appreciate you working with Mr. Rosendale further. And actually, the Four Corners would probably appreciate some time with you on this issue.
I've noticed that. I saw your letter, so thanks.
Yes, thank you. Ms. Luria, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us today to discuss this important budget. Just wanted to bring up something that's been top of mind in my recent discussions with veterans across our district, not only veterans themselves, but employees at the Hampton VA Medical Center. And I appreciate you coming down to visit us last year and see the facility. But the Air Commission report has raised a lot of concern for our veterans in the community. And I've tried to reiterate, this is a very long-range planning document that is just recommendations, but can you kind of talk through your thought process, the timeline, the next phases of what will be done with these recommendations so that I can, make sure to share that with veterans across Southeastern Virginia?
Yeah, Ms. Luria, thank you very much for the question, and thank you for hosting me in your district. And I think, the recommendation at the heart of your district is addressing an issue that you and I think live personally, but there's one afternoon, and vets, unfortunately, there have to live every time they go to the current facility, which is that horrible traffic. And I think having new VAMCs on both the north side and the south side for that vet-rich, including very woman vet-rich population is, I think, a good recommendation. Nevertheless, these are recommendations that, pursuant to the statute, again, passed in, I think, 2018 or maybe 2017, required me to submit those recommendations. They now go to the commission. The commission itself can't yet meet because the commissioners are stuck, or are at least not proceeding. They're in the Senate. My goal would be to continue to update those commissioners with data that we're able to generate through VA as they're considering those recommendations. They can agree or disagree with my recommendations, meaning they can send them back to me to take another swipe if they think I've done the wrong thing. Ultimately, they need to report to the president. The president then has to decide, does he submit them to you or does he not? That is to say, he can disagree with my recommendations, and then they'll come to you. At the end of the day, you all have an opportunity up or down all of these recommendations. But I think as the statute lays out, it's a pretty quick process. And frankly, if the president submits them, I think you would have to, if you're going to disapprove them, you'd have to do that over his veto if it ever got to that. But we're a long way from that. This process is just beginning. I hope that in the communities where there are concerns, the commission will actually come to the community to hear from you and from your veterans about this, and we'll continue to provide them data to make sure it's up to date. We're at the beginning of this process. I don't know if it gets any further, and I don't know precisely where it ends, but inevitably, more input from veterans about real-life experience is going to be critical to the outcome.
Well, thank you, and I've tried to reemphasize that to the veterans and the employees of our Hampton VA as well, that their input is valued as part of this process, and that that we're a long way from any changes. And I apologize for the buzzer in the background, but also that please, I would hope you confirm this, is that there is not going to be any closure of existing VA facilities without the further replacement of those. By, in this case, actually more modern, more suitable, and some cases closer to where the veterans live, by having one on both the peninsula and the south side. So we'd just love if you could alleviate some of those immediate fears that we've been hearing so much about across our community.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, these recommendations, as our infrastructure investments funded by this budget submission, which is the largest ever infrastructure request we've ever made at VA. Those things are all based on the idea of getting veteran care closer to veterans, getting the kind of care that veterans are going to need available to them in more settings. But in all cases, we won't change existing areas that provide care until there's the new facility to replace that. So in no circumstance will, let me put it this way, in every circumstance, VA is staying in every market across the community, across the country. We assessed 96 separate markets among the 50 states. We are staying in every single one of those markets.
Well, thank you for that confirmation. And I know I'm short on time, but just wanted to reaffirm as well that this budget request, you've evaluated it in every way possible to make sure that we can meet the veterans' healthcare needs as rapidly as possible. We do continue to hear a lot about delays, and I know some of that has to do with hiring and other aspects. But just can you confirm quickly that everything that's focused in this budget is focused on getting veterans as care that they need as rapidly as possible and alleviating any of those delays?
Priority number one for VA is timely access to world-class care. Every one of those words is important: timely access, world-class care, and this budget helps us do that.
Okay, thank you again for briefing our committee on the budget, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Luria. I recognize Ms. Mace for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Bost, and I appreciate all of you being here today, especially you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us, for making the time to speak with us. And I know we're not always going to see eye to eye on funding priorities for the VA, but I hope we can work here together, as we do oftentimes on committee. And Chairman Takano, this is one of the most bipartisan committees I sit on, and all of us here want the best for those who've served our country. My father served for 28 years in the United States Army. I've seen what he had to go through to get help and health care after exposure to Agent Orange. I've been at the Ralph H. Johnson VA hospital to take my father to appointments there. I've been there when his best friend passed away after being sick and visiting them in the hospital. And so I commend everyone, especially the Ralph H. Johnson healthcare system in Charleston. It's the only 5-star rated hospital in the state for patient satisfaction. Their VA Community Living Center has also received a 5-star rating for an unheard of 11th quarter in a row. The Becker's Hospital Review recently recognized our VA as one of the top 54 hospitals in the South. And I know they're doing tremendous work with medical devices. They have a 3D printer there where they are not only saving taxpayer dollars, but providing just innovation with regards to medical devices. And so needless to say, the Ralph H. Johnson Hospital is doing a fantastic job serving our veterans locally and across the state, and given the resources that they have. They do, however, have a few challenges, and I appreciate your help working through a few of them at one of our top-tier facilities. First, I know that the President's budget is proposing a 21% increase. That increase will ensure the department continues to provide physician, as part of that increase, is the department ensuring that they are focused on physician-led care for our veterans?
Yes.
Excellent. As you might know, Charleston, South Carolina, Lowcountry as a whole is gotten very much more expensive to live in. A family of a 3-bedroom apartment, if you're a family of 4, will cost you about $3,000 a month in rent. Housing costs have gone up 25 to 30% over the last year and a half. One of the next issues I hear about from folks at the VA is locality pay. And Charleston has a very high cost of living, but despite the high cost of living, locality pay is lumped into an all others pay category with rural cities, meaning they're not able to competitively pay doctors, nurses, technical staff with the rising costs of living. And last month, the committee held a hearing on healthcare workforce recruitment and challenges within the VA system, where I was able to at least briefly address this issue with those that were testifying with the Assistant Secretary of Human Resources Administration. Though I was advised that the GSA plays the primary role in establishing locality pay, the VA also plays a role in advocating for facilities increasing in locality pay. So I'd like to ask you today, what can I do on my end to get my VA workforce workers better pay that is commensurate with the cost of living. And not only is it housing, but the cost to buy groceries has gone up significantly as well. The cost of living there is just very expensive, more so than it's ever been.
Yeah, I was in your facility in February. We talked at length about this issue. It's a challenge kind of across the facility there. There's a major challenge in other cities. I've just recently visited Salt Lake City, Burlington, Vermont. So,
but what can we be doing? I apologize, I only have a minute and a half left. What can we or need to be doing to ensure that we're getting them pay commensurate with the, cost of living?
so I'm talking to GSA and to the rest of the government. There's a federal pay committee that sets locality pay, so we're working that issue.
Okay. And then another issue that I'd like to ask about stems from the Defense Health Agency's decision to relocate Beaufort Naval Hospital to the Beaufort Marine Corps Air Station. As I understand it, the VA clinic in Beaufort is now exploring alternative site locations. VA beneficiaries in both the 1st and the 6th Congressional District, which is Jim Clyburn's district, depend on this clinic being in the Beaufort area. And I request that representatives of our veteran community in Beaufort be included in these discussions and offerings. If one of the things that I've learned in my first 15 months in office is sometimes there's a gap in communication, whether it's federal, state, and local. Not only is it government entities that sometimes lack that communication, but also including those who are on the ground, stakeholders, those that will be most affected, and would, I think, need the opportunity to contribute to the overall, I think, conversation is essential. Any thoughts on that? Are you familiar with that particular site relocation?
I'm familiar with the site. I'm not familiar with the relocation process, but you asked for my commitment that local vets be involved in any decisions on that and discussions on that. I'll make sure that happens.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. And I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Mays. Recognize Mr. Sablon for 5 minutes. Mr. Sablon.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Chairman Takano and Ranking Member Boss, for this hearing. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. It's good to see you, sir.
Nice to see you. Thank you.
I'd like to thank you for recently making the program of comprehensive assistance for family caregivers available in the Northern Mariana Islands. This change is important for many of our veterans and their families. We have, since we announced this week, we have been getting now inquiries from veterans about how the program works, would they qualify and things like that. And I'd like to also thank your staff at the Office of Congressional and Legislative Affairs, especially Assistant Secretary Patricia Ross, for their role in bringing PCA-FC, finally bringing it to veterans in my district. Now, with the caregivers program now available in the Marianas, does the proposed budget provide VA with sufficient resources to provide veterans in my district with the same level of service under this program as is offered elsewhere in the nation?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Sablon. 3 things. One is the budget does envision this. 2, the level of assistance is consistent across the country, including, obviously, in Northern Marianas. 3, we have a whole list of resources that we'll make available to you, if we haven't already, of where your constituents can get access to additional information about the program. I'll just give you one number right now. The websites, I think, are the addresses are too long for me to give you right now, but the number is 808-566-8384, which is our Pacific Islands Caregiver Support Team. And so I urge you to get there. The last thing I'd say is I associate my enthusiasm for Patricia Ross and our Congressional Affairs team with yours.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And that seems to be a Hawaii number, and that's it hasn't been exactly easy to get very much out of the Hawaii office, to be very honest with you. But we'll continue to try working with them. I appreciate this. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate everything that your department and the Biden administration is doing for for the Northern Marianas. I don't have any further questions, Chairman Takano. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Representative Sablan. I recognize Representative Miller Meeks for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair Takano and Secretary McDonough. It's so nice to see you again.
Thank you.
The President's budget request does not include funding for the 9 rare cancers that you appropriately added on Tuesday as presumptive disability. I have a bill in this similar context with Representative Brownlee, H.R. 4571, the Service Act, which is bipartisan, bicameral, just passed through the Senate, that would direct the Department of Veterans Affairs to provide mammograms screening for female veterans who served in areas associated with burn pits and toxic exposure. And as a female veteran, even this Saturday, I was approached by another female veteran at 35 years of age with breast cancer who was very complimentary that we had put this bill forward. So the question I have is, how much funding will the VA require in fiscal year 23 and beyond to implement this change, the changes you've made in the
Yeah,
9?
for the 9. I don't have a specific number for you. I'll get you that under separate cover if it's okay. And I appreciate all the work that you and Chairwoman Brownlee are doing on mammography. It's obviously a huge priority for us.
Yeah, and we're very hopeful that it will come forward as it's desperately needed for our female veterans. On a different topic, but same in relation to benefits, the administration is asking for 76 employment counselors at the Veterans Administration Veteran Readiness for Employment Service to help participants find employment. And this is in line with with the bill I did with Representative Kai Kahale on the Vet Tech bill, which we were very happy to see passed last year. And I'm wondering, how do these positions differ from disabled veteran outreach program specialist positions funded by the Department of Labor through the Jobs for Veterans State Grants programs, and then where will these individuals be housed or located?
I think it's a reasonable and highly logical question. I don't have a good answer for you. If I can get you that one in writing too, I will.
And will they be located here in Washington, D.C.?
No, they'll be, those are all field positions, so people are closer to where the action is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I think is necessary. We have,
Agree.
As you know, programs we're doing working. There are colleges who have Veterans Affairs officers. We've done that with several of our programs in our community colleges as well, too. So
I think there's exciting stuff happening in the field in Iowa and other places, and so we want to make sure that we get closer to that action.
excellent, so that there's more coordination, less, more seamless, easier for the veterans. So we appreciate it.
Skinnier headquarters unit, more action in the field. That's what we're looking for.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. So thank you for making sure they get out of Washington, D.C. and into the communities they serve. With that, Chair Takano, I yield back my time.
Thank you.
You so much.
Thank you, Representative Miller Meeks. I now recognize Mr. Allred for 5 minutes.
Great. Good to see you, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
I also want to congratulate you on the expanded coverages for veterans exposed to harmful substances.
Thank you.
That you actually came to Fort Worth with the president and talked about. I think that's really important. And it's also my pleasure to host you at the new Garland VA in North Texas, and for you to see some of the great work that's going on there. With Mr. Elzy, I recently introduced the bill to authorize the fiscal year 22 major construction projects at the VA, and I saw in your testimony, some of what you were discussing there. But just for my constituents, for our veterans in North Texas, can you talk a little bit more about how you see these major construction projects, including a spinal cord center, injury center that we're going to be continuing to fund at the Dallas VA, and why that's important that we continue to update this aging VA infrastructure across the country?
Yeah, thanks very much. We've been talking a little bit this morning about the Air Commission, which is a kind of a big strategy piece with a long look. And what does the VA need over the next 3 decades? And so, and that's important. But we have our internal project by project high priority effort to try to get the rest of this infrastructure up to speed now. This is not, can't be like just a 3-decade look ahead. This got to be a day-to-day thing where we know we have needs right now, including in high growth areas like Dallas. And so we're continuing to lean into what we call our SKIP process, our internal process for prioritizing projects. This is why, I think Mr. Boss did us a favor by highlighting the importance of infrastructure in his opening comments too. This is why the president's request for infrastructure this year is the highest ever sought at VA. Could we use more? Absolutely. That's why he asked for the $18 billion in the initial infrastructure package. We're continuing to work through that, but a high growth area like the one that you and Mr. Elsie and I visited with the president is a perfect example of why we need it.
Yeah, I think, folks might not realize that the median age of VA's portfolio is 58 years, and that 69% of VA hospitals are over the age of 50, and so we need to continue to invest in this. And knowing you, I want to ask you this because I know what your priorities are. But as you know, Texas has the highest population of women veterans, and so I want to congratulate you and thank you for the increase in terms of the request in its budget for $766 million of funding for gender-specific care in fiscal year 2023, which is a $66 million increase. I'm very glad to see that increase for Texas because it'll be very pertinent for us. But the VA is requesting a $2.2 million reduction in funding for VA's intimate partner violence program. And so, knowing you and knowing your priorities, I wonder if you could just discuss what the rationale is there, if there's any reasoning that I'm maybe not aware of why there's been a reduced request there.
So I'd like to take that to make sure that I get back to you with my best understanding of this. But let me just say about the funding, this specific funding. I think it has to do with some of our carryover and what I recall was a substantial increase FY21 to FY22. But I'll make sure I get you the specific answer on this. I just want to say one thing, which is I've been talking to the IG about some of these specific programs in the field and the fact that we can do a better job of making sure that there's uniform training, uniform uptake, and uniform offering of services across the enterprise. The program on intimate partner violence is an example of that. And so we're staying on top of this, but I'll get you an answer on the funding request.
And to be honest, I assumed that there was something like that going on there, but I certainly appreciate
Fair, I appreciate you bringing it to my attention.
Just one more question. The independent budget VSOs recommended that VA request $2.925 billion for major construction in FY23. We were just talking about this, but VA's budget requests only included a $1.45 billion increase, and that represents a decrease of about 10% compared to last year's level. So I'm just wondering. I know we have multiple funding sources going to VA construction here. Is that due to us addressing the backlog of some of our construction projects, or just trying to get some insight into the decreased requests here?
Yes. So look, I think that this doesn't grow as fast as I'd like to see it grow. We're trying to prove ourselves along the way that we can be trusted with these big investments. It's not long ago that we were in this situation as it related to the facility in Aurora. I think since then, that is, say, Colorado, we've proved in Orlando, for example, where we came in ahead of schedule, under budget, that we can make these kinds of investments. And so we're working down our internal priority project. The funding that we seek for this year is the biggest level that President has ever sought for infrastructure funding. It gets us down through the high priority projects for this year. And as, for example, in El Paso, where we're showing your state, different part of your state, I get it, but your state, we're showing, I hope, in a new way of doing this, that we're expanding an existing facility for new capability. We can show that we can do this in a cost-effective way. Each time that we prove these new concepts, we're asking for more money in the following year. So we're trying to build both your confidence in us and make sure that we're using a real data-based prioritization process to make each of these decisions.
Sure, and I'll just, really quickly, Mr. Chairman, just say thank you to the North Texas VA folks who worked with me on acquiring the Garland VA. That's a great example, I think, of the cost savings that can be had when we find creative ways to acquire facilities. So with that, I'll yield back.
That's a perfect example of a cool new pilot on how to do these things. And I think you and your community should be proud of that, and we appreciate your work on our behalf for that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. I now recognize Mr. Elzey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here. I know this has been
Great to see you.
long meeting this morning, and thank you for coming to Texas to the VA clinic in Fort Worth. That was a fantastic trip, and watching veterans take care of veterans is a phenomenal part of that process. You know, the VA is the only government agency that actually gives back. Everybody else takes, and your job number one is customer service. And it's been very clear to me since I've been in Congress that that is something that you, from the very top, are supremely interested in and have taken a lot of care to make sure that that's conveyed. And with that, I'd like to thank you for the recent decision not to discharge or decrease any support to legacy participants, applicants, and their family caregivers. Veterans and their families in my district were very concerned about losing those services, and when we did an event called Helicopters for Heroes, a whole bunch of these folks gathered around, expressed their concerns. I expressed that to you, and you said, we're going to take a look back at this and maybe not do this right now. So could you amplify a bit more about what that decision means to the caregivers and their programs, and what critical support these programs provide?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you very much. It was great to travel with you to your state, along with Mr. Allred, Mr. Veazey. I will say it was a nice way to travel too. The decision on the caregiver program, we are going to expand the caregiver program to all era veterans in October of this year. That was envisioned by a statute that you all passed in 2018, the caregiver statute, which initially started as a post 9/11 veteran-focused program. It's now going to incorporate veterans of all eras. To prepare for that expansion, we had to take a look at what we call the legacy participants. So these are post 9/11 vets in the main, and to see whether they continue to qualify under the expanded program. What you brought to my attention, we had been hearing elsewhere, which is that perhaps the way we were making those assessments about the legacy participants was set too high a barrier to continuation of the program, including such that as many as 90% of legacy participants had received notice that they were going to be discontinued from the program. It strikes me that that's too high. So we said, let's take a pause on this and communicate, as we have now done, individually through the VISN offices and through the Med Center offices to every participant in the program to say, even if you have received a letter, in all cases, your stipend for this program, which helps veterans stay at home and get their care at home, and continue to live a quality of life at home, you will continue to get that stipend in all cases until at least April 2023. Point one. Point two, we are looking at the program and the basis on which we make the assessments as to whether you continue to see if we need to expand the rules under which we made those determinations heretofore. And no one, well, let me put it this way, everyone will be run back through that screen, which is meant to be more inclusive, consistent with, as I understand it, your intent when you enacted, this body's intent when you enacted that statute. Right now, in fact, today, at this minute, we're meeting downtown with all the VSO leaders on this topic. We're in constant communication with this committee staff and with your individual office staffs about these questions. And we'll make a determination as to whether we need to issue new regulation or take some other step about that more inclusive screen for continuation of the program. None of this should come as a surprise to you. None of this will come as a surprise to you. We'll make sure that we keep the channels open for a lot of different reasons, including the fact that it was your intervention with me, along with several other things I heard from over the course of these last couple of months that led to the pause in the first instance.
Thank you, sir. And I'd like to close with thanking Congressman Allred for working with me on H.R. 7500. Mr. Secretary, you guys are doing a fantastic job. It's a job that is never complete. And so the idea that you keep on striving for getting everybody the care they deserve is very admirable, and I appreciate it. I yield back.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate working with you, Mr. Elsey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elsey. Now recognize Representative Slotkin for 5 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr. Secretary. Thanks for being here for this long hearing. I think there's a pretty strong bipartisan spirit around helping our veterans, and in particular, the access to the care they need. That's really the issue that I feel strongly about. So I have a couple of questions. One, we saw the positive announcement related to toxic exposure this week, with additional illnesses being considered pre-existing conditions if you served. And we know that burn pits in particular, but toxic exposure more generally, is the Agent Orange of the post-9/11 generation. And so I thank you for that. I was trying to go back and look at when we accepted Agent Orange as a toxic chemical, what that did to the numbers of personnel, the money that you needed to cover those additional things. Can you very briefly walk me through whether you have this budget covers the resources for all these additional soldiers coming in?
Yeah, so we did something important in this budget, which is we had some carryover in VBA. As a general matter, we can then plow that carryover back into the budget. And what we then do is reduce the top line to account for that. We decided we did plow that money back in, but we did not reduce the top line because we anticipate you all, through this negotiation that the chairman has been referring to and Ranking Member Boss referred to, are going to add additional presumptives over and above ours. So that's the first thing we do, which is we use that overage to invest in personnel. Second, the president's, for next year, by not reducing our top line, the president's budget also then increases the top line so we can add more claims processors and continue this process at VBA. That's based on both the decisions we've made to date and our assessment, but we got to be very careful on this, about what might happen in the PACT Act, which is to say, while we are taking steps, overtime, funding overtime, hiring new people, the automated process, we are taking those steps now in all cases, and those are important. They will be insufficient.
Yeah.
Which is why we're talking right now to the Senate about making sure that they consider, and I hope they agree, to put in their version of the PACT Act in the Senate additional workforce authorities that we need.
Okay. So I just appreciate, we all want to do the right thing by veterans, but making sure the resources are tied to the mission, I think is going to be super important. And please let us know what you need.
Count on.
On a different topic, I've been, in my district, we know that when a veteran has PTSD, there's a range of ways to help them. And medication and therapy is one or a couple of options, but we passed the PAWS Act, which allows a pilot program to explore whether prescribing a dog to a veteran who is suffering from PTSD can be helpful. Now, in my district, this is a given. Like, people who have dogs understand what they do for your mental health. We have a pilot program, and I understand the VA is not supporting it with $10 million and asking these veteran service organizations that work with dogs to in-kind their work in that program. $10 million feels like chump change for the VA. Can you help me understand why it's not being funded?
Yeah, fair enough. So thank you. One, thank you for getting this enacted. I know that you're a real driver behind it. The request that we have includes basically $2 million to support staffing at the facilities and program evaluation and data tracking on the programming. We've chosen 5 sites: Anchorage, Asheville, Palo Alto, San Antonio, and West Palm Beach, and chosen 5 service dog organizations, so existing
Right.
organizations in each of those facilities, each of those areas. So I think the logic is that that's happening there anyway. We will staff up following the work that they're doing and making sure that we get the data to then, presuming that it comes back, as I think you rightly do, I assume the same thing, then we're in a position then to expand this programming, including with our funding. So
Yeah.
I think that's the logic. I get your, the point is, should we go ahead and fund what was going to happen anyway? I think that's the question. I think that's the volley back to you.
Yeah, I guess it still feels like it's pulling teeth to get the VA, maybe not you, but to get the VA.
I don't know that that's right. I mean, we got the 5 sites, we've got the 5 organizations. I was there when the president signed it. It just feels like a couple weeks ago. I think it might have been a couple months ago. But I think this is a reasonable question. I'd be more than happy to talk to you about it because I think we probably could find the money. But the question is, this was going to happen anyway. Do we really kind of swoop in and dollar for dollar what was going to happen anyway? I think that's a reasonable question. I don't think this is us withholding. I think.
Yeah, I just hope that when the results come back, it took us many years and kind of against the will of the VA before you got there, saying you need scientific data, you need more research, you need more this, that, and the other. Shouldn't we throw whatever we can against this problem of PTSD and suicide? And I think Michiganders feel very strongly about dogs being part of that equation. So in any case.
I say 2 things about this. One, yes. If this works as I think it should and will, then yes, we're going to throw everything at this. 2, I have some history of trying to be on the other side of your will, and it's not a great place to be. So I get it.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I yield back.
Well, we certainly appreciate that you have some policy advisors. We thank you for your passion, and we respect Michiganders and dog lovers all over this country. Mr. Trone, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing. And Secretary McDonough, it's fantastic to see you again here join us today. I just want to take a moment and say thank you to you and your team for really speedy follow-up to the question we had the last military construction VA hearing. You've got a great team there, and we really appreciate it. I want to also take this opportunity to discuss the Sergeant Parker Gordon Fox Suicide Prevention Grant Program, which aims to enhance community-based prevention strategies. The budget states the VA has established a, quote, robust program evaluation designed to measure short, mid, and long-term effectiveness of the program and identify best practices after the study. And what I'd like you to expound on, if you could, a bit, was explain the evaluation process. And in that process, is there a mechanism to try and move quick and learn on what we've learned as we go and improve the care for our vets right away versus waiting for the program to be over and then doing a report and then trying to help our vets? But can we take the winning ideas and best practices and implement them as quickly as possible?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Trone, very much. I think this is really innovative and exciting piece of work, and I wish I could claim it. Frankly, I can't really claim anything, but this is really your all's idea, and I think it's a good idea, and I think we should get it in the field, and the money will be in the field. We want to obligate it by the end of this fiscal year, and we will have the evaluation going concurrently because we believe, as you just said and as Ms. Slotkin just said, that time is of the essence here. So yeah, I want to make sure that we're tracking appropriate protocols and everything, but the intention here is to move with all due speed and all due dispatch. That's for sure.
Okay, great. Well, we really appreciate that, as do the vets. So we appreciate you investing in community resources. Focus on these upstream interventions.
Definitely,
I think
definitely.
going upstream is, so key. I hate to bring back the dogs again, but it was in my list to talk about also. And I would support Ms. Slotkin's thoughts regarding we've got to try all different strategies and to help our vets that have had PTSD and these highly trained service dogs that the PAWS Act, allows and sets up. I think it is important that the nonprofits, get paid, for their services. Obviously, it's a lot of time, a lot of work, and that would be my thoughts on it. And
Yeah.
any further comments? Or are we done with the dogs?
Well, look, I hope we're not done with the dogs because I hope that this program works and that we can expand it. But I think you've heard my view, which is that this is a program that was going to happen in any case. Should we really come in and backfill the dollars? I think it's a reasonable question. We've decided to come out one way. I think you and Ms. Slotkin are coming out the other way. I'll take this and look at it. I think it's a very legit question, and let us take and study it.
Well, we appreciate your thoughts on this and respect your decision-making.
Thank you.
So thanks for sharing those. This is a good opportunity to invest in new strategies, and make sure our partners that work with us are noted for their contributions. I'd like to also just, in closing, quickly note that the VA budget has really helped our student veterans and expanded the toxic exposure care. I mean, your budget continue to include the flexibility for vets education and the VR&E benefits that came out of COVID-19. They look a lot similar to the Remote Act, which was, my bill, and we really appreciate all your work in that. And also much appreciated is the work you folks do on the requested 795 full-time employees who we need to get on board to process these new Agent Orange presumptive conditions, the 3 new presumptive conditions for Agent Orange, and also the 3 new presumptive conditions for respiratory conditions. These are, really important goals that, Congress supports. So, Mr. Secretary, thanks for your leadership, and thanks for your efforts and your commitment to our veterans. We're very fortunate to have you there. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Trone.
I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Trone. I now call on Mr. Gallego for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary, I will not be asking any questions about the dogs or who let the dogs out or anything of that nature, though I do care about the dogs. I do want to focus on VA home loans. Arizona is a very fast-growing place. We have a lot of veterans that move there. Our housing prices are gone up fairly fast, and makes the VA home loan, unfortunately, sometimes not as attractive. It's a fact, they've risen 30% just in the last year, and I think it's even above that now. I've actually used the VA home loan now 3 times. It's a great loan. It's actually extremely important, I think, also for veterans to get housing as soon as they get out of service. It's probably one of the quickest guarantees of them having success, as well as creating generational wealth. And last year, letter asking for VA for some flexibilities to the program to combat the challenge of appraisals coming in under asking price, and to expedite reconsideration of value, or ROV appeals. Have these or any other steps have been taken yet to make the VA loans more competitive in this market? And if not, why?
Mr. Gallego, I'm embarrassed to tell you I don't have an answer in front of me, but
Okay.
I owe you an answer. So let me get you an answer, and I'll make sure that I get back to you personally in the next.
That'd be great, because I just don't see housing prices falling fast enough to make the VA loan competitive, especially when you have people here that are giving like cash offers above appraisal.
I think that's the issue, to be honest. I don't think that price per se is the option. I think the requirement for appraisal is the option, and is the issue. And you flagged this for us. You've raised it with me personally several times. I just don't know the latest on this. I think that's the issue, which is we're trying to figure out how we maintain our fiduciary responsibilities in light of the fact that everybody else is just waiving the appraisals, and that's obviously a more risky.
And we
posture.
and we definitely have to keep the appraisals. But the question is, how can we keep the appraisals and make sure we send them back and actually be able to
In a more
comply
timely way.
in a very timely
That's
manner.
a fair point. And that's where I owe you an answer. I don't have the latest on that. I will get it.
Okay. Secondarily, on two bills I passed last year, the Native American Veteran PACT Act, signed in 2020, it basically prohibits veterans from being charged copays due to our tribal treaty obligations.
Yes.
And I serve with a lot of Native Americans. My state is 1/3 of all land areas Native Americans. We have a great tradition, as you know, from Arizona, but it's still being charged. So what is taking so long, and how will we pay these veterans back for any of the copays they paid since my bill was voted on and signed enacted this last January?
I think it's a fair question. I think that those copays have only recently been put back into place in any case because we had waived copays for everybody in the context of the pandemic.
Yep.
But I take your point, and I owe you an update, and let me take that one.
Yeah, and it's not even a point. I mean, it is our treaty obligation that we're supposed to provide 100% of healthcare services.
It's a good argument. It's
for-
good. It's
for-
good. I'm not rebutting it. I agree with you.
And so, and lastly, another bill I had to reimburse specialty care or purchase and referred care for Native Americans was also signed into law. And again, just from my experience serving with my guys, and I've heard specifically of their struggles because the VA won't reimburse them and instead refers the cost to the overburdened IHS service, right? So instead of going directly to the doctors or specialists, they're referring it to the IHS, and the IHS is probably also saying, like, why are we doing this? This should be a VA responsibility. So in the budget that you have, it says that the VA is still working with stakeholders on how to finally implement these reimbursements. So can you just try to talk to me about why that's taking so long, and when can we expect the bill to be fully implemented on this?
Yeah, I don't think there's a good answer as to why it's taking so long, and so maybe the best way to do this is to let the individual cases drive the policy rather than hope the policy captures the individual cases. So can we just follow up with you directly and get those vets' names and let us get those fixed?
Yeah, I mean, and of course, like, it's not. This is not just stemming from like two of my buddies. This
Of course.
is something that we've heard.
Yep, of course. I'm just
generationally. So that's it's better. In my opinion, it's better to actually implement the law that we passed, so that way we don't have to keep doing this. Because sometimes you're not going to have a very active member of Congress that served with a lot of Native Americans.
It shouldn't take that. I agree with you. It's just
So
that sometimes the vignette drives the policy making
Okay, I
in
see
a
what
way
you're
that I'm not trying to say this it replaces it. I'm just saying that sometimes that vignette drives the policy making in a more effective way than the top down trying to move the team.
Yeah. Well, and again, so my staff will be here and available to your staff to see how we could actually fully implement these laws.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Geigel. I now will call on Dr. Ruiz for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Takano. Mr. Secretary, it's good to see you again, my friend, and thank you for being here. As an emergency medicine physician, public health expert, and founder and co-chair of the bipartisan bicameral Burn Pits Caucus, I'm committed to helping our service members receive the benefits and care they need and rightfully deserve. I applaud and recognize the steps the VA has taken in the last year to grant some of our veterans presumptive benefits. However, as you know, there is much more that needs to be done. There are more veterans that need our help. The VA's recent decision to grant presumptive benefits for burn pit exposed veterans suffering from 9 rare cancers makes clear that the VA recognizes a causational link between carcinogens, toxins in burn pits and cancer. So now we must provide the needed funding to ensure we can cover the care and benefits for all veterans that were exposed. Mr. Secretary, while I'm encouraged to see investments in addressing the effects of toxic exposure, I'm curious why the funding is for more studies and not implementation to ensure the VA has resources to help veterans suffering from toxic exposure. Can you elaborate on the section of the VA budgets that says, quote, the VA budget increases resources for new presumptive disability compensation claims related to environmental exposures from military service? What resources exactly will the VA be increasing, and which new presumptions will be receiving this increase in resources?
Yep. So the budget envisions the resourcing necessary for the decisions made by the moment of the of the submission of the budget. That's so we do not argue, and frankly cannot argue, that everything we would need for the implementation of the PACT Act, for example, or even of the additional 9 conditions that the president announced earlier this week are included here, because frankly, those those decisions were not made at the moment we had submitted the budget to you. Then the question is, why don't we include that now? There's 2 reasons. One, when I make decisions about new presumptive conditions, I cannot presume that the process is going to end, for example, with the rare respiratory cancers, in covering that, or in the brain cancers and constrictive bronchiolitis that we will be looking at this year. So for me to put money in the budget would be to prejudge that outcome. That's the first reason. The second reason is, while it does look to me like we're making good progress in the negotiations on the PACT Act and the work that you all have put into the PACT Act, it is not yet done. So I can't ask for money for something that is not yet law. So we've taken prudent steps
Thank you.
to date, but we can't jump ahead of the line here.
Thank you for that answer. By funding studies addressing recommendations on burn pits, does the VA have a timeline of when the next round of recommendations on presumptions will come out? And will they be focused on expanding the list of cancers now that some form of cancers have been added?
I've said before, and I'll repeat again, that this year we anticipate addressing brain cancer and constrictive bronchiolitis. That's for this year. I've tried to, I haven't put a specific date on those in the last couple of months because it's kind of moving around a little bit, but we anticipate those to be the next 2 clusters of conditions.
Great. I believe it would bring a big relief to many veterans who are dying and undergoing treatment from brain cancers and constrictive bronchiolitis. So at this point, I want to yield back my time. Mr. Secretary, I appreciate your leadership and your efforts and dedication to ensuring we take care of our nation's history, our nation's heroes. Veterans in this country need advocates, not obstacles, when seeking the health care that they deserve. And I appreciate you providing seismic shifts in the VA's approach to veterans suffering from illnesses due to burn pits. There's still a lot to do, and we won't rest until all the presumptives listed on the PACT Act get passed through the PACT Act. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ruiz. I now recognize Representative Frankel for 5 minutes. Representative Frankel. Representative Frankel, you need to unmute.
Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Oops.
Yeah,
Did
thank
I
you.
do that? Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I know you've been here talking for a while, and I've been monitoring a couple of meetings. So if you've asked one of these questions, just where are we in terms of reducing the backlog on claims and appeals and so forth?
Yeah, thanks so much. As of right now, I think we're probably somewhere below 230,000 backlogged cases. That's not as low as I obviously want it to be. We have a goal to get under 100,000 at the end of the next fiscal year. So I feel like we're making progress. We're making progress through 3 ways. 1, mandatory overtime. 2, hiring additional personnel. We're on schedule to hire about 2,100, actually 2,094 additional people at VBA to carry out these efforts. We've hired about 1,700 of those people right now, and they're in various stages of training. And then the third way we're going to get ahead of this is on automating those claims. We're adding 3 conditions per quarter. We're trying to work down the most popular conditions so that we're working through that. I'll make one last point. Overall inventory of claims at VA sometime today or tomorrow should duck under 600,000. So that's all claims, backlog and not backlog. It'll be the first time in several years that we're under 600,000 when we reach that moment. We'll try to keep driving this thing down. PACT Act would add more. We'll keep working to bring that down.
And the personnel, I know there's been a big vacancy. Is it difficult to get the personnel?
No, actually, what's interesting is that we're finding a lot of interest, in terms of number of applications per opening. We feel quite good about it. We do have some interesting personnel challenges. Increasingly, people find that they have options where they can work remotely in the private sector. So we have to be careful on how we structure work requirements. They need to be on site. How often? Currently, we're in max telework. People have to be in the office 2 days per pay period. So we're looking at all those things and geographic requirements and stuff like that. But right now, we have a lot of interest in job applications per opening. I think that stems from the fact that people are very excited about the mission at VA, and I don't blame them one bit.
That's good. Now I'm going to touch on the third rail here, which is what I'm paid the big bucks to do. First, I want to just say that thank you. We agree that not requiring co-payment for contraception goes a long way, especially in reducing high-risk births. Of course, there's a lot of other benefits, but you know what? So would federally supported abortion, and I know that is a very controversial issue. You have any comment on that?
Our statute would allow us to provide abortion services. We do not provide abortion services pursuant to rulemaking. If we were to provide abortion services, we would have to do that through rulemaking, including through public comment. And so if we were in a position to make that choice, this committee has my commitment that you would not be surprised about it, that you would understand the reason for which I was making that decision, and you'd be full participants in the process by which we'd carry out that policy change. But at the moment, I don't have anything to report on such a policy change.
Okay, your first sentence was you feel you do have, the law does permit or does not permit?
Yeah, it's not that I feel it, it's that the law does permit.
Does.
Does.
So is there a reason that you would not pursue rulemaking on it?
It's not been VA policy now for several decades, notwithstanding the permissive legal structure for it. I have just not changed what is existing VA policy across Republican and Democratic administrations now for decades. And so, again, if I were to make that change, I would do that in full light of day and in full consultation with this committee.
Well, I would urge you to consider that, and there'll be further discussion on it. But thank you very much. Yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Frankel. There are no further witnesses, but before we finish, Mr. Secretary, I do have one thing that I want to give you an opportunity to clarify. VA's involvement in any discussion about fourth mission work at the border.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say about that?
Well, thanks so much for asking about this. I've noticed some public comment about this. We are not in discussions with DHS about whether any policy change at the border regarding Section 42 or Title 42, whatever it's called. So we're not in any of those discussions. There's been some suggestion that we are. We are not. 1. 2, we have provided important support to the border, including having vaccinated 54,916 DHS personnel, including through things like Operation vaccinate our workforce, we've had 6 teams. We have deployed people to the border on 6 occasions to vaccinate CBP, ICE personnel. I think that is an admirable thing to do squarely in the national interest. Similarly, we have on 2 occasions provided clinics at the border for veterans who live in Mexico. Veterans who have access to VA, should have access to VA services. So we have done that on 2 occasions. And if there were 4th mission assignments, obviously we consult with you all on 4th mission assignments. I am quite proud of the role that VA has played in the conduct of 4th mission assignments across the country, in vaccinating our federal partners, in carrying out important efforts in states when, for example, those states do not have access to hospital beds for non-veterans. We open the doors and have in hundreds of instances to non-veterans for that care. Never does that care come at the expense of access to care for our veterans. The 4th mission is a critical mission for us. It's a mission that this budget invests in, and it's one that we feel very proud of and strongly about. In no case does the 4th mission come at the expense of veteran access to care. So I hope that helps provide some information about this issue, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the answer to comment for the record on that issue.
I appreciate your response, Mr. Secretary, and I too am proud of the proud mission, the 4th mission work the VA has done, especially during the pandemic. I think countless lives were saved in nursing homes across the country because of VA's expertise that was offered at the invitation of state governors and local officials. And of course, 4th mission is often invoked during national disasters, and the pandemic was a national emergency, of course. So I personally thank you for the attention that the VA has paid in that regard. With that, your testimony, we thank you for your testimony today, and you are now excused, and we'll now move on to our second panel.
Thanks very
much.
much.
Mr. Secretary. Appearing before us today on the second panel, I'm going to give us time to reset the second panel before I introduce. All righty. Well, appearing before us today are representatives of the Independent Budget, a coalition of veteran service organizations. The Independent Budget provides an alternative view of the budgetary needs of the department and of our nation's veterans. We welcome them to today's hearing. Our first witness for the panel is Mr. Shane Learman, the Deputy National Legislative Director of the Disabled American Veterans. Mr. Learman has worked for DAV for more than 23 years. Our next witness for the panel is Ms. Tammy Bartlett. Ms. Bartlett is Deputy Legislative Director for the Veterans of Foreign Wars, where she consults with Congress on issues related to health care, including funding for women veterans. And finally, we have Mr. Morgan Brown. Mr. Brown has worked for military and veterans organizations for many years and serves as the National Legislative Director for Paralyzed Veterans of America. Mr. Learman, I recognize you for 5 minutes to give your testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will start out with comments in reference to the Independent Budget Benefits Working Group. And so we are very appreciative to you, Mr. Takano and Ranking Member Boss, for the opportunity this afternoon. And on behalf of being the chairman of the Benefits Working Group for the Independent Budget, we are pleased with the administration's budget request for the general operating expenses, specifically the Veterans Benefits Administration, VBA, and the Board of Veterans Appeals. Earlier this year, the IBVSOs recommended additional FTE and a $100 million for overtime, primarily to help VBA make progress on reducing the backlog of disability claims. Additionally, we requested these resources to prepare VBA for an influx of claims related to VAs adding new presumptive diseases and in anticipation of Congress passing toxic exposure legislation. VA's budget request would provide funding to add 795 new FTE, which will aid in processing claims for new respiratory conditions associated with toxic exposures, and it will provide for claims modernization and automation as well. This funding will also be instrumental in helping to drive down the current backlog of pending claims. For the Board of Veterans Appeals, the IBVSOs recommend an additional 15 Veterans Law Judges, or VLJs, an additional 100 FTE to assist in reducing the backlog of hearings pending at the Board. VA's budget request for the Board of $285 million is a 25% increase over fiscal year 2022. This would provide the Board with 256 new FTE, including 12 additional VLJs, 151 decision writing attorneys, and 93 appellate support and administrative staff. We believe these funding levels will assist in addressing the legacy and AMA appeals while also putting the Board in a position to prepare for the potential influx of appeals due to the court case of Baudet v. Madonna. While there are a few minor differences, VA's budget request for VBA and the Board is very much in line with the IB's recommendations we made earlier this year. Mr. Chairman, overall, the proposed budget for the general operating expenses is a 13% increase over fiscal year 2022, and the IBVSOs are pleased with this very strong budget proposal from the VA. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my section of the testimony. I am pleased to answer any questions you and the committee may have.
Well, thank you, Mr. Lehrman. Ms. Bartlett, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Boss, and members of the committee, on behalf of the Independent Budget Veteran Service Organizations, thank you for the opportunity to present our comments on the healthcare issues in the IB budget report. Overall, the administration's VA budget request in fiscal year 2023 is a very strong proposal that will provide comprehensive and justified increases across most of the discretionary appropriations accounts. The administration's total medical care funding request is approximately $122 billion, which is very close to the IB's estimate. The IB's and the administration's recommendations for fiscal year 2023 are much closer than they have been in recent years, but we continue to differ on the appropriate amount for VA healthcare. Our recommendations reflect multiple components, including the current service estimate, the increase in patient workload, and the additional medical care program costs. It reflects increases based on uncontrollable inflation and the projected federal pay raise for all VA employees in the fiscal year 2023. The IBVSOs also estimate a 4% increase in VA healthcare utilization due to deferred demand, increased sickness, and morbidity of COVID. Our estimate of growth in patient workload is based on a projected increase of approximately 81,000 new unique patients. The IBVSOs also differ with the administration in terms of funding suicide prevention. The administration says it plans to reduce spending in this area of $101 million, which is largely driven by the completion requirements of the 2019 Executive Order Prevents. But we believe the move to reduce funding in this area is premature and undermining the recent progress achieved in combating this complex problem. The IBVSO's recommendations include sufficient funding in hiring approximately 450 new FTEs to support the new 988 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and for vet center programs to increase staffing, resources, and expand their fleet of aging mobile vet center vans. Lastly, VA has underprioritized the long-term services and support for years. This cannot continue, as the number of veterans in the oldest age cohort are increasing significantly. VA's geriatric and extended care strategic FY 2020 to FY 2024 plan projects expenditures for long-term care will double by 2037. In order to keep up with the demand for long-term care services and supports, the IBVSOs recommend an increase of $375 million for VHA's institutional care and home and community-based programs. Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, these conclude my remarks, and I appreciate any questions you may have for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bartlett. Mr. Brown, you are now recognized for 5 minutes for your testimony.
All right. Thank you, Chairman Takano, Ranking Member Bost, and members of the committee. For more than 30 years, the IBVSOs have worked together to develop and present concrete recommendations to help you ensure VA remains fully funded and capable of carrying out its mission to serve veterans and their families. My comments today will focus on our recommendations related to VA's infrastructure. VA's Strategic Capital Investment Planning, otherwise known as SCIP process, seemingly provides a prioritized list of VA construction, maintenance, and leasing projects. But the department's annual budget request regularly fails to include the full SCIP funding estimates or priorities. It also doesn't provide the necessary information to develop an actuarial schedule of facility lifecycle repair and replacement costs. At best, it provides non-binding suggestions to the VA process, which are regularly ignored, contributing to an ever-increasing backlog of overdue maintenance, construction, and leasing projects. Not prioritizing infrastructure has led to the need for the Air Commission, which will be tasked with reviewing VA's recommendations for its medical facilities. We support VA's plans to direct funds from the Recurring Expenses Transformational Fund towards its construction accounts. It's a good step, but clearly reflects the lack of proper funding in the original budget request. Insufficient VA construction management and congressional oversight procedures are also obstacles to timely and cost-effective infrastructure maintenance and construction. Currently, VA doesn't have the staffing or expertise required to plan or oversee VA's infrastructure at the levels needed to reduce the construction backlog. To overcome VA's infrastructure challenges, Congress must not only provide significantly increased funding to fully address these longstanding issues, but also enact reforms to better ensure the use of these funds. We believe VA's construction budget should be at a minimum 3% of its overall operating budget, just to keep up with the growing backlog. In order to reduce the backlog, in addition to the increased funding, more employees and contractors will be needed to oversee the increased workload. This funding should be separate from the AIR recommendations. The initial Air Commission recommendations proposed a substantial number of changes, but would not close a lot of VA facilities as some anticipated. Most of the market assessments initially recommend retaining a large percentage of VA facilities and then shifting services at them. This suggests that we should not wait until the completion of the AIR process and instead must redouble efforts to improve the facilities VA already has. There are billions of dollars worth of necessary repairs and upgrades needed for VA buildings, which should take place concurrently with the AIR process. I want to thank you again for this opportunity to submit our views for the administration's budget request for VA, and we are happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. And Ms. Bartlett, I apologize for mispronouncing your name. It's not Bartlett, it's Ms. Bartlett. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questions. Mr. Brown, I'd like to begin with you. I think we can all agree that for years, VA has under-budgeted grants for state veteran home construction and refurbishment. That's part of what you were saying about infrastructure funding. As a result, in the years leading up to the pandemic, VA accumulated a significant list of projects with state matches that it could not act upon. From the independent budget's perspective, what are the consequences when VA does not request the funding it needs to address the full project lists?
I think the answer to that is actually pretty simple, and it's what we're seeing now, and that is the growing backlog of projects. I believe in our the formal recommendation, we suggested that Congress provide enough money to clear the entire pending list of projects on that. We believe that's the right thing to do. The states have already provided half of the funding needed for these projects, and we know that they're needed out there to better take care of veterans.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Learman, in your written testimony, you note concerns regarding the staffing levels in the VA Veteran Readiness and Employment, or VRE office. Can you please detail these concerns for the committee and the importance of long-term retention for VRE counselors to ensure consistent delivery of services to veterans?
Yes, thank you very much. VRE, Veteran Readiness and Employment, is an extremely important program for veterans. I myself have gone through the program and successfully completed the program. Having counselors available on a consistent basis, and enough of them, to make sure, one, veterans are getting their questions addressed. If they're in an apprenticeship program, it becomes exceptionally important, because a lot of times that VRE counselor is kind of the go-between between the veteran and their employer. So if we don't have those resources in place, we overtax those VRE counselors, they're going to be spending more time on administrative duties instead of actually providing that core function of providing that counseling service directly to the veteran.
Well, thank you for that. I've personally had experience with constituents that felt that there weren't enough counselors. Ms. Bartlett, we have heard somewhat different messages from VA about whether it has sufficient capacity to provide timely residential or inpatient substance use treatment, especially in terms of facilities and available beds. What are your members having any challenges accessing timely substance abuse treatment at or through VA?
Chairman Takano, I can go ahead and three organizations can step back and get you an answer on that. But as far as discussing about substance abuse disorder, if you look in this past year's national suicide report from VA, that information was actually missing. Where years past, we were given information of those veterans who died by suicide who may have had a connection to substance abuse disorder.
All right, but you aren't able to, but you'll get back to me on whether your members are having any challenges accessing timely treatment at or through VA. All right. Do the other panel members care to comment on that question?
So
Mr. Brown?
thank you for that opportunity, Mr. Chairman Takano. I can say, as far as PVA members go, one of the things that we've observed is the lack of available beds for a veteran patient with an SCI injury when it comes to substance abuse detoxification. Very limited capability within the VA and almost non-existent in the private sector.
Wow. How about you, Mr. Learman.
Specifically, I'm not aware of any of our members having long wait times to access to it, but we're very concerned when we start talking about substance abuse and getting them into the programs they need, because we know that is a large driving force behind homelessness, and that is an issue that we're consistently trying to push back and to make sure they're getting the help they need for substance abuse. We believe will have an impact on reducing homelessness as well.
Well, very quickly, my time is quickly running out, but I wanted to get a weigh in from all of you. I just recently introduced a new bill this week to turn one of the administration's proposals regarding mental health services into law. If we can pass this bill, called the Remove Copays Act, VA will make a veteran's first 3 mental health outpatient appointments each year free. Do you believe this will have a real effect on financial barriers to care for veterans, and will your organization support the bill? Go ahead, Ms. Bartlett.
Thank you, Chairman Takano, and thank you for that piece of legislation following the VA's mention of that in their budget report. The VFW does support that legislation, and we look forward to seeing it go through.
Thank you. Mr. Brown?
I know we're still looking at the legislation, but I do believe that we are going to be endorsing it as well.
Great. Mr. Learman?
Thank you. Yes, I have reviewed the bill, but my boss hasn't told me what I'm supposed to say quite yet, so I'm pretty sure we can, but I got to verify that before I give you a direct answer. Thank you.
Okay, all right. I will now recognize Ranking Member Boss for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lehman, thank you for your honesty, because, you know, we all understand how that is, of course. So, Ms. Bartlett, I'm wanting to let each one of you kind of expand on where you might think the budget opportunities that looking at this budget, where you could think it would be better for taxpayer dollars to serve our veterans more effectively. Is there any area that you'd like to expand on?
I think, first of all, expanding on women veterans, we, as the IBVSOs, have a $200 million recommendation in addition to the budget, and that's broken down. One of those key components is maternity care, and then also peer support. So when a woman veteran goes to a clinic, she has someone there who looks like her, and has gone through the system and may know that you can go through the women clinic and also get mental health through that women clinic. Mammography, as we talked about earlier, with toxic exposure, ensuring that if a woman had served overseas, that she gets mammography care earlier on.
Mr. Brown, would you like to follow up on that same question, please?
Sure, thank you for this opportunity. Well, I think the 2 areas that I can think of that would have the most immediate impact on our members certainly is the expansion of long-term care, accessibility, long-term systems and supports. In particular, the one program that we hear from our members that they would like to be able to access is veterans-directed care. The other area that I can think of would be in the area of construction. Currently, there are only 6 VA facilities that offer long-term care beds. There's only one of them west of the Mississippi. There are a couple projects underway, one in San Diego, another one in Dallas, that I believe this budget does provide some additional funding for those projects. But there are others that are out there that are pending that would be beneficial for our folks should Congress feel it appropriate to apply some additional funding that way, and we would appreciate that.
Mr. Lehrman.
Thank you, Mr. Boss. I believe areas we would really like to see increased attention or funding to is really the IT portion for the Veterans Benefits Administration and specifically the Board of Veterans Appeals. In order to streamline the claims process so our veterans don't have to wait longer, they get their benefits delivered quicker, if we provide some level of automation within VA, that's really going to help. The VBMS system was not designed to be automated, and it's been over 12 years now since it was created. So finding ways to improve that is going to improve the system for all veterans. And then the case flow program that the Board of Veterans Appeals has, some of these programs, my experience in this for like 20 some odd years, VBA at one time had 6 different IT programs and the board had like 3 that you had to constantly check between. They weren't all streamlined together. So when we create these other programs, but we don't integrate them with the technology for automation. So if we're creating a separate program for automation, now we've got even more programs that can't talk to each other. I think if we find a way to get the funding in those areas, we invest in a long-term IT solutions, that's going to benefit everybody for years and years to come.
I agree completely. Ms. Bartlett, back to you. The VA budget has expanded greatly this year under the proposal. Meanwhile, the population of veterans the VA serves has kind of remained fairly constant. Where should VA focus its resources to target service-connected conditions?
Thank you, Chairman. The best place is at transition. Getting that individual as they're leaving that service and ensuring that they're aware of all VA programs, especially healthcare, especially if they have a service-connected injury, getting the comp and ben benefits claim started, and then right into the VHA system.
Yeah, I have to agree with you because, you know, I mean, and we've talked in this committee so many times that we are trying to encourage DOD and the TAP program to be given in great detail. A lot of that is if veterans choose not to go, that's real bad, but it's so much better than it was whenever I was there because I've said it so many times. What I got was a tap on the back, see you later, and that was done. Now we are trying desperately, and we hear that a lot. But thank you all for your testimony. With that, I yield back.
Well, I want to thank the second panel of our witnesses. I want to make sure that you know that all of the entirety of your written testimony will be included in the record. And I want to thank you for your attendance today. I want to recognize Ranking Member Boss for any closing remarks he may have.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I appreciate the Secretary and the VSOs representing and everybody being here today. You know, I know I know a lot of work goes into the budget, and the request every year that when it's brought forward, I want all of you to know that it's how serious we are as we're considering it. The justifications are as important as the amounts being requested. The level of veterans' demand for VA services should be the basis for everything. I want to make sure that VA is taking into account everything we know about the demand to meet the veterans' needs today and in the future. And this budget does not seem to do that in several key areas. And I am committed to working with the Secretary to get that right. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back, and thank you for the hearing today.
Thank you, Ranking Member Bost. Before I begin my closing remarks, I just wanted to say that we have heard that DAV has endorsed the bill. So thank you, Mr. Lehrman. Your boss was watching.
It's not the first time she's had to pull my bacon out of the fire, Mr. Chairman, so thank you.
Well, it's important given the cost of bacon these days. All right, so I want to thank all the witnesses again for their contributions to today's discussion. And as we've heard today, we have big goals for VA to continue to ensure all veterans have access to the care and benefits they've earned, to finally recognize toxic exposure as a cost of war, and to update VA's infrastructure, and so much more. These budget requests showcase our values and should forecast the future we want for VA, one that saves every veteran everywhere, now and for generations, one that serves every veteran everywhere, now and for every generation to come. While there is much more work to do for the department and for Congress, I am confident that through our collective work efforts, I'm confident through our collective efforts, VA can tackle these challenges and deliver care and services and create a community for our nation's veterans that we can be proud of. We'll say all members will have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and to include extraneous material. And again, thank you for appearing before us today, and this hearing is now adjourned.